Chen Hansheng was part of the former elite of society, but suddenly he returned to his senior year of high school. Now, he intends to make changes and improve the relationship he had with his friends. The story begins with Chen Hansheng looking straight ahead, covering part of his face with his hand. In the background, a starry sky and a full moon illuminate the night. He is in a tall building when suddenly a middle-aged man, accompanied by some women, approaches and respectfully greets him, calling him Mr. Chen. The man raises his glass of wine and a toast and with a bright look, praises Chen as a promising young man. Chen, however, remains calm and rejects the compliment. The man hesitates in the face of his coldness, but keeps insisting, offering him more alcohol and trying to convince him to trust him, assuring him that he doesn't have to worry about anything. However, Chen stares at him disapprovingly as his interlocutor drinks in an attempt to distract him. He observes his own reflection in the wine glass and, for a moment, is lost in thought. His name echoes in his mind, but he no longer recognizes himself. Convinced, he concludes that everyone around him is hypocrites and only treats him that way because he is a millionaire, including the man and women sitting on the next sofa, whose falsehood is evident. Soon, a young woman named Jiang Mingjai appears, who comments that Chen's future wife will be very lucky. The man accompanying them, however, corrects her, saying that Chen is single and one of the most coveted parties of the moment. Jiang, a little embarrassed, sits next to him and soon realizes his sophistication and high standards. Holding a business card, she longs for an opportunity to be noticed. Decided, Jiang approaches and begins to praise Chen, talking about the importance of balancing family and career. He listens to her in silence. Then she leans discreetly and hands over her business card, hoping he will accept it. Chen picks up the card with a faint smile, and Jiang is beaming. On the table, there is a bottle of alcohol. The man realizes that Chen has barely drunk, but still offers to take him home. Chen firmly refuses, saying that his house is close enough to go alone. He sighs, walks to his car, and holding his jacket in one hand, places the other on the door handle. Suddenly, a loud male catches your attention near the wheels of the vehicle. He bends down and finds a small orange cat. Picking it up in her arms, Chen comments that the cub was lucky to have been noticed, because otherwise it could have been run over. Then he releases the kitten, which quickly runs away. Before disappearing into the darkness, he still looks at Chen one last time. The car's headlights shine brightly, illuminating the night. Chen settles into the front seat, closes his eyes, and relaxes. When he opens them again, he looks out the window and sees the same orange kitten next to two adult cats. At that moment, he remembers his own family and realizes that he has not visited them for a long time. Decided, he starts the car and puts his hand on the gearbox, preparing to drive home. With his seatbelt fastened, he reaches for his shirt pocket and pulls out a large number of business cards. Among them is Zhang's, marked with a dash of lipstick. Chen stares at the cards for a long moment, thoughtful. Then, without hesitation, he throws them all away. The cards are chaotically scattered on the ground. Some are carried away by the wind and others he simply runs over when starting. Without looking back, Chen makes his way under the lights of the night city. Many skyscrapers are visible in the background. Chen keeps one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on his chin. He looks out the window while listening to music. After a while, he turns his gaze to the road and his hand firmly holds the steering wheel. He increases speed with confidence, following the words of the song, about 500 kilometers. Suddenly, a huge truck came towards him with the lights of the headlight illuminating him. The protagonist's eyes widen in shock. The horror and fear are visible in them. Suddenly, the protagonist is called by a girl. She is wearing a long dress and with a bicycle. The girl says that smoking is forbidden here. Chen closes his eyes, holding his head with one hand, which suddenly starts to hurt. He opens one eye and tries to understand what exactly happened to him and where he is. The girl in the long dress stands in front of him with a surprised expression on her face. The people in the background are surprised by her carelessness. The guy sitting on the bench coughs and the protagonist is confused for not recognizing who is sitting next to him. His eyes widen from total incomprehension. It seemed that everything was just a dream. The main character continues to be perplexed by what is happening and suddenly notices something under the incomprehensible gaze of his comrade. He notices his reflection next to the bench where they are sitting. His eyes get even bigger and the bead of sweat appears on his face. He wonders if this is some kind of time travel. The boy absolutely does not understand what is happening. The dark-haired girl looked down awkwardly, keeping her silence and waiting for at least some reaction from Chen. The protagonist is grabbed by the face. The man says that his behavior is not usual, and this should not under any circumstances be done. The unknown tall guy shakes his hand into a fist and says that he hopes the main character has a happy future and recovers from a broken heart. The protagonist is annoyed by the stranger's stubbornness in his words. His friend sitting with him on the bench is confused, not understanding what happened to the young man. Chen bends over holding a cigarette in his hands. The protagonist's facial expression becomes immensely gloomy and he seriously and coldly asks the tall unknown guy who he is. The horror is visible on the face of the tall guy from such a reaction, and he decides that he needs to leave and says that Chen doesn't deserve so much attention. Meanwhile, the girl just looks silently, but then finally decides to talk. The girl says that if Chen really wants to ignore her, that's fine, but she made it clear that she doesn't want a relationship now and her opinion won't change anything. Chen looks at her worried when she mentions it. The girl also says that if he continues, she will tell her mother about her smoking. The protagonist doesn't even remember who his mother is but is afraid that she will find out. He gets extremely angry and doesn't understand how the girl knows her mother. The friend still looks at him with incomprehension, and the tall guy is getting angrier and angrier by the minute. The girl hands him a bottle of water and informs him that he should come for enrollment later. Chen refuses the offer and the tall guy complains that the main character is pretending to be a hard guy out of nowhere. The girl gets silent and does not understand the hero's behavior. Little by little, she reaches the hand in which she holds a bottle of water towards her, then leaves the bottle on the seat, and with a dissatisfied look turns around and leaves. But Chen does not comment on this, and watches the girl and the tall guy leaving on a bicycle. He asks his friend if he really confessed his feelings to her. The friend puts his hand on his shoulder and asks him to stop pretending. The protagonist realizes that this is the girl he had a crush on as a student. He turns his questioning gaze to the guy next to him and asks who he is. His best friend Wang Zibo grabs him by the shirt, shouting that he is his best friend and has always smoked with him. The protagonist questions if he is that Zibo who went to Iraq. This makes his friend even more angry. After a while, they walk down a typical Chinese street where there are many shops and three-story houses. The friend asks not to drink so much because of the enrollment. The protagonist replies that he understands. After a while, they arrive at the classroom. The main character receives congratulations on successfully graduating from school. His teacher, with a slight smile and closed eyes, hands over a graduation notice. His friend is surprised that he passed the first level exam, and Chen mentions that he also passed the second level without any problems. Then the young man looks at his smiling teacher named Lao Shu. The protagonist reminds him that this teacher will not resist a disease caused by cigarettes, and he unfortunately will not be able to attend his funeral because he will be abroad in the future. Meanwhile, Wang thanks the teacher for his attention. Chen at that moment realizes that he has indeed gone back in time. Suddenly, the young man notices a red pack of cigarettes on the table next to a pen and a stack of papers. The protagonist quickly takes the cigarettes for himself under the surprised looks of the teacher and his friend. He asks Lao Shu to smoke less. Chen looks at the teacher with a pack of cigarettes in his hand and reminds him that teaching in high school is already difficult, but smoking will harm him even more. The teacher looks at Chen with evident incomprehension because he clearly did not expect such words from him. But the teacher laughs lightly and tells the main character that he will smoke less in the future. The protagonist says that he will take out his cigarettes now just to be sure, which makes his friend and professor even more surprised. That tall guy is outraged why Chen was accepted to the most important university. A girl tries to defend him by saying that Chen always had good grades, and their conflict is just a misunderstanding. The guy doesn't want to know and remains indignant. The girl continues to defend Chen and tries to explain the reason for smoking. The boy interrupts her and calls the main character a criminal and brawler. At that moment, Chen and his friend appeared behind him. Chen approaches the girl he was in love with and asks where she's going to study now. The girl blushes a little and replies that she is going to study at Tunghai University. The young man says that he is going to study at the neighboring University of Finance and Economics. The guy next door tries to humiliate him, but nothing comes of it because the prota doesn't even pay attention. He asks what time it is, and the girl looks at his watch saying that it is 5:20. The main character takes her hand and asks her where she bought the watch, and also hints that this time means I love you. The tall guy indignantly pushes him away, accusing him of trying to reconfirm his feelings for the girl. But Chen doesn't react to this. He decides to walk away while the tall guy shouts angrily behind him. Meanwhile, a speaker screwed into a tall pole where music-like sounds are heard. The sun's rays shine through the windows, illuminating an empty classroom where the Chinese flag stands out intensely on the wall. Chen calmly walks out of the school with a sign in his hands, looking at the school children in uniform walking nearby. He looks to the side and sees a crowd of guys playing basketball and trying to throw the ball into the hoop. The school kids walking to the hoop communicate and laugh with each other, discussing something interesting. The main character looks at the sun that brightly illuminates his tired but relaxed face. He closes his eyes, enjoying the sun. The last rays of sunlight that illuminate the street gradually come to an end, giving way to night. Walks alongside his best friend. The protagonist thinks that for the first time in several years he has the opportunity to return home. Someone behind them calls his name, causing Chen and Zibo to turn around. They notice the girl Xiao Yang and the guy he met earlier in school. The protagonist is unhappy to see them again. Xiao goes up to him on a bike and says that he and his friend didn't write anything in his notebook for his classmates. The main character silently looks at her, lowering his curious gaze down slightly. Xiao takes a notebook for his colleagues from the bicycle basket. She holds the notebook in her hand and hands it to Chen, asking him to write something as a souvenir for her. The tall guy looks at the main character with even greater irritation and dissatisfaction than his actions expect. He demands that Chen write something good instead of looking at Xiao. The girl is slightly red and asks the young man to stop looking at her. But the main character makes an excuse by saying that he is just looking at the notebook. He opens the notebook for his colleague and starts looking at what it is already written there. The notebook is full of wishes. His attention is drawn to a poem by William Yeats, which the tall guy named Gao wrote and put as his own. Xiao points his pen at the blank sheet of paper in the notebook and demands that the young man write something instead of reading the entire notebook, after which the protagonist decides to give the notebook to his best friend so that he can write it first. But the friend still hasn't figured out what to write, and so he is embarrassed. Wang writes that he wishes Xiao to become more and more beautiful with age. Then the notebook goes back into Chen's hands and he should write at least something about it. But apart from the desire to remain young, he can't invent anything. After thinking for a while, the main character starts to slowly write his wishes in Xiao's notebook. He writes her a small poem with a play on words. But the tall guy makes fun of him, and the other girl thinks the poem is unique. Xiao looks carefully at the notebook and notices that the verse is written very well. She warns Chen that she won't tell her mother that he smoked. Gao encourages her to go home, citing the fact that it will soon get dark. Chen and Wang saw the group leave. His friend is outraged that he forced him to sign the notebook first. The main character teases him by asking if he feels anything for Xiao, which his friend immediately denies. They walk together and the main character suggests going to a burger joint tomorrow. His best friend is very surprised and Chen explains the choice by saying that he has a family dinner tonight. Zibo looks at the main character and asks if he can skip this dinner. The protagonist turns the alley and leaves his friend alone, saying that he doesn't understand anything. The friend looks at him with incomprehension without saying a single word. The main character walks along the narrow alley that is lit by a lantern and signs of various establishments. The young man remembers various moments of his childhood. For example, when he came home with a dirty school uniform and his mother scolded him for it, or when as a teenager his mother asked him to bring him food, but he refused. He also remembers a certain day sitting late at night with a huge mountain of textbooks doing his homework. The main character remembers a middle-aged man in the club fawning over him in the future. Chen thinks about his childhood, adolescence, and his future, that he already knows what is going to happen. The protagonist comes close to the red door that is closed behind the metal fence. He looks at this door and stands still. A faint smile touches his lips, and a lone lamp illuminates his face while he is at the entrance. The young man raises his hand to the door and starts knocking, demanding that his mother open it. His mother suddenly opens the door, unhappy that he screams so loudly, and says that he always forgets his keys. The protagonist enters the house complaining that it is hot and he needs to turn on the air conditioning. While wondering where his father is, he takes the air conditioning remote in his hands. His mother reports that his father is still at work. Then she hands the main character a plate with several slices of watermelon. Chen is surprised and soon starts eating. He thanks his mother and she says to eat calmly. While he eats on the couch, his mother asks him to take a shower later and put his university admission documents on the table. The protagonist happily eats the watermelon and finds himself thinking that the watermelon still tastes the same familiar as before. In a tall building, the lights are on in the middle of a dark night. Chen's mother holds the university acceptance notice in her hand. She smiles proudly and is happy that there is now a college student. The protagonist stands in the bathroom listening to his mother's plans for his future life. The woman is already thinking about her graduation from university and her grandchildren. The main character smiles ironically, looking at himself in the mirror. He mentally talks that his mother will not see her grandchildren for the next 35 years. The main character is distracted from his thoughts by the noise coming from the living room of his apartment. The happy young man gets out of the shower, realizing that his father has already returned home. The protagonist's father stays in the living room and unbuttons his shirt, simultaneously confirming his return. Despite the evident tiredness, something important catches the attention of Chen's father. He takes the remote control of the air conditioner and adjusts the temperature to keep the family comfortable. Suddenly, the furious mother invades the room with a coat and a pack of cigarettes, accusing Chen of smoking. The protagonist tries to justify to his parents that the teacher gave him cigarettes to pass his exams, but the mother does not believe it and accuses the father of lack of attention to the son. The father says that it is too early for Chen to smoke, and the mother adds that the father should also smoke less, and it is time for everyone to sit down at the table. Now, the mother and father of the main character are sitting on the bed, and she asks to give her son money to take with him to university. The father says he should let his son go ahead and do what he wants. The mother looks at her husband with concern and complains that with age the son has started to listen to her less. Although the parents always encouraged his ideas, the father notes that the son may not be the best student, but his intelligence does not let him fall, and they need to support him. Chen's mother listens carefully to everything her husband says about her son's future. She looks away, lost in her own thoughts about her son. It's starting to dawn on an ordinary Chinese street. The street lights are still working. On the bedside table, there is an alarm clock that signals that it's time for him to get up. The protagonist, without thinking about anything, is partially covered with a blanket. He turns his gaze to the alarm clock that sits peacefully on the bedside table. He then looks around the room, especially at the manga on the shelf, and realizes that he definitely wants to stay here. Meanwhile, a strong stream of water flows from the bathroom faucet. The mother notes that Chen got up early today. The main character calmly brushes his teeth and looks at his tired mother, saying that she is hungry. The mother yawns and says that he can buy his own breakfast because she goes to bed to sleep. Chen says nothing but thinks that this is clearly not the way to raise his son. After a while, the young man comes near a street food stall in a playground and asks the price of an egg pancake. After the seller's response, he is mentally surprised by such a low price and orders 2 pies for him. Chen wonders where the payment in code is. The seller looks at him in total bewilderment and doesn't understand what code he is talking about. The main character seems to receive an electric shock when he realizes, which is 2002, and you can't pay for the cell phone, and the guy realizes that he has no money with him. The mother left him nothing, and the seller asks if he will buy it. The main character refuses and quickly makes up an excuse that pancakes are harmful because the grandmother told him so. Then he goes home disappointed, mentally complaining that the payment system and life in the past were extremely inconvenient. Chen abruptly distracts himself from his thoughts by paying attention to something in front of him. Xiao is running in a clearly breathless racing suit. The protagonist calls her and she immediately turns her attention to him. Xiao looks surprised, not expecting to see him now. The girl looks at him and asks what he's doing here. So early, it's only 6:30 in the morning. Suddenly a thought flashes in her head, but she doesn't have time to carry the idea that came to her head to the end. The protagonist greets her, but she quickly interrupts him and says that she knows why he is there. The girl puts her hands on his hips and repeats once again that she does not want a relationship now. The main character freezes because not expecting such a conclusion from the girl. Xiao assumes that it was precisely to observe her that he got up so early. She looks at Chen with her arms crossed and asks if he was trying to get her attention when he ignored her yesterday. Chen remains silent. He stands up awkwardly and hears the girl say that he is a good guy, but she doesn't need a relationship. And only at graduation will they be able to discuss it. The main character realizes that this is precisely the reason they are not dating yet. Xiao continues to say that she doesn't want to be distracted. She thinks to herself about the promise she made throughout school that she would not have a relationship. Xiao asks him not to comment on anything because everything is clear, and Chen agrees, saying that she is smart, then invites her to breakfast where they can talk. Xiao is embarrassed and notes that she should invite him because he helps her a lot with her studies. The protagonist agrees with her and suggests going to a convenience near the police station that has soy milk and refried beans. He says it will be delicious. The diner has a bright yellow color. There are several ordinary police officers and passersby. An acquaintance greets Xiao, and she happily and politely greets him back. Meanwhile, the main character enjoys his favorite food. Uncle Zhang scolds him, saying that Chen eats too much and doesn't understand the evil of eating too much. The protagonist looks at him questioning while eating another dumpling. The young man claims that he will be in perfect shape until he is 30. Xiao asks how he knows this, and he explains that a few days ago he met a fortune teller, so he knows his future for sure, and then continues to eat. Chen also said that he will be rich and successful, but unfortunately without a wife because he does not have a marital line. The girl gets angry and says that this is absurd because men quickly change their minds and feelings. Chen replies that a fortune teller taught him how to count palmas fortunes, explaining that each palm pattern is unique and shows a person's fate. The young man notes that the breads made by the owner or his wife will be different. He tells them that the owner's breads are smooth, but his wife makes them with folds. Xiao is skeptical of such a statement. They then turn their perplexed and slightly awkward gaze to the owners of the diner to see them work and make the breads. She watches the owner and his wife make the breads themselves. The girl pays attention to the board on which the breads lie and sees that they really have completely different textures and shapes. She observes this with shock, and at this moment the main character notes to himself that she has no basic knowledge about baking, because the shape of the bread depends on its filling, and that is the whole secret. He attracts Xiao's attention and reaches out to her, which causes the girl to push the girl away from the attention of the owner of the diner and his wife. The protagonist, with a mischievous expression on his face, thinks that with the help of divination he can confuse a person. He reached out and invited the girl to see his hand. Xiao asks what he is doing, but he says that it is just divination. After thinking for a while, the girl finally decides to trust him in the matter of divination. The protagonist, looking at his hand and explaining the meaning of the patterns according to Confucianism, he explains that if the line of salvation is long, then you will be healthy and happy. Xiao is surprised by this statement because she did not expect such serious words from the main character. He marks a line of wisdom on her hand, saying that she loves to fantasize and also that she will be happy. He calls the marriage line confusing, then says that she needs to stay away from the guys running around her and needs to be careful. The young man pauses dramatically and says that he seems to have figured out who her ideal husband is, which surprises her. He takes her hand and says that her ideal husband is right in front of her. The girl, indignant, moves her hand away, and Chen quickly thanks her for breakfast. The young man walks relaxed towards the exit of the diner and prepares to go home. The wife of the owner of the diner looks at him with a piercing look of suspicion. Chen tells the owner's wife that the girl paid for him. At this moment, a policeman enters the diner and then turns around looking carefully at the main character. The protagonist holds a toothpick in his mouth and looks questionably at the policeman. He thinks these people look familiar to him. The policeman is talking behind him, and the diner owner's wife looks disapprovingly in Chen's direction. The protagonist turns around in complete confusion, trying to understand what exactly is going on. The diner owner's wife starts talking to the cop and points her finger at Chen. The cop suddenly turns around and looks at the main character along with the diner owner's wife. The cop's eyes narrow in anger and dissatisfaction when he sees the young man. Chen seems to be shocked and quickly says goodbye to Xiao, saying that he urgently needs to go home because he has work to do. He starts running, realizing that this policeman is Xiao's father. Early in the morning, a double blue bus is at the stop of Gancheng bus station and is gradually filled with passengers. The protagonist and his best friend discuss the difference between girls in university and high school, and the fact that unlike university school, it is a student study choice. The main character is unhappy that his friend is asking him too many questions, but then his friend mentions that he saw Xiao. The protagonist quickly looks out the window and Zibo realizes that he was interested in the subject. The young man watches from the window the girl next to his father near an open car. The friend says that Xiao's father's car broke down, and the main character hasn't seen her since the confrontation with her father in the diner. The girl notices that someone is watching her and turns her head to her observer. She walks away with displeasure when she sees Chen. Meanwhile, the bus driver asks if everything is okay with the captain. The policeman replies that the car broke down and he wanted to give his daughter a ride to university. The driver offers to give her a ride since he doesn't mind and is on the way to her destination. The police captain's attention is attracted by a voice asking if her car broke down. It turns out to be that tall guy named Gao. He offers to help her by giving her a ride to university. The guy promises that he will keep her safe and says that there are a lot of people on the bus, so it will be easier to get to the destination by car. The main character watches and thinks that the captain will refuse. The captain is tired of today's failures but does not trust the rich Gao and believes that he has bad intentions. So, the policeman decides to ask his daughter's opinion if she wants to go by bus or with Gao by car. He waits for his daughter's answer. At that moment, Gao shines with hope and happiness, but Xiao chooses to travel by bus and the main character has no words to comment on the situation. Then Chen invites his friend to sit in another chair, but Zibo refuses. He asks his best friend to move so that Xiao can sit next to him. Zibo asks why the young man doesn't change his seat and he replies that he feels sick. The girl gets in front of the bus and stops in the aisle between Chen's seats. He looks out the window and his best friend has his eyes closed, but even displeased, Zibo still changes places, although he is very angry. The protagonist looks out the window and the policeman asks to keep an eye on his daughter since their universities are nearby. Chen says that he will definitely take care of Xiao, shocking Gao, who is standing nearby. The bus runs down the sunny highway at great speed without making any stops. Zibo is unhappy with his place because the curtain is broken and the unit is still 5 hours away. Chen asks the maestro to give his friend a visor since he won't be able to endure such a long trip in the sun. Then he warns Xiao that it's very clear and says that he got up early today, so now he goes to sleep. He closes his eyes and the girl thinks he's trying to avoid talking to her. In this way, she walks away dissatisfied and suddenly the young man rests his head on her shoulder and actually falls asleep. Meanwhile, Xiao's father's intuition tells him that something is wrong after his daughter boards the bus. The bus also continues to travel quickly along the highway without slowing down. After some time, the bus drives towards the bridge and in the distance a boat is visible in the water. The passengers shout that it is the Yangtze Bridge and end up waking up the protagonist. He looks sleepily out the window and is distracted by the girl, who is looking intently. Chen looks at the girl with interest. He realizes to himself that up close she is even more beautiful than usual. Chen keeps a neutral expression, and the girl asks if he was surprised by the sight of the bridge. Chen looks away as if ignoring her question, and then turns sharply to the girl. The girl abruptly turns away from him with her eyes wide on her face, completely red. The main character looks with a slight smile, asking if she was surprised by this bridge. The girl is still in shock and looks at the main character with a clear blush on her cheeks. She is very embarrassed by what is happening on the bus. The protagonist tells the girl that he has been to this city and not only crossed the bridge, but also seen local attractions, so it is difficult to surprise him with anything. The girl looks at him as if she has some misunderstanding. After a while, they finally arrive at the bus station and get ready to get off. At the bus station, there are several different buses that people get out of. Zibo complains about the heavy suitcases while the hero himself says that he warned not to take so many things with him. Xiao is strangely surrounded by 3 large suitcases and is surprised by the lack of things that Chen has, but he says that everything is at the university and her mother will send her the rest. The girl is surprised by the main character's resourcefulness, realizing that it could have been done more simply. Chen calls her a simple mind. He gives advice on how to get to her university and tells her the exact path. The girl asks how he will get to the university and he replies that he and his friend have already decided to take a walk in the park. The girl freezes completely and the prota says that they will see each other later. She shouts called Chen, which leaves the young man and Zibo surprised. Xiao is furious and remembers that the protagonist promised to take care of her. She looks intently at the backs of the two waiting for action. The people at the station watch closely what is happening. The main character turns to her visibly nervous and asks her not to scream. He slowly extends his hand to her, but Xiao just pulls away from him irritably. In an attempt to attract her attention, the protagonist whispers that they need to leave quickly before passersby think they are a couple. This statement infuriates the girl even more, and she looks at Chen's hand indignantly as he tried to soften the situation. The young man offers to accompany her. He sees a tear roll down the cheek of the furious girl, and she declares that he was leaving her. The main character tries to calm her down and says that he will help her take her things to the station and will not abandon her. The girl sharply bites her hand and causes a deep shock to passersby. They even think that Chen might be a thug. After a while, the whole trio awkwardly sits at a bus stop surrounded by suitcases and packages. Chen's hand is partially hidden in his pocket and shows a rather strong bite mark. The girl looks guilty at the protagonist's hand but says nothing about it. The main character shamefully looks at the ground, believing that his reputation is ruined and everyone thinks he is a scoundrel. Xiao also feels strange, realizing that maybe the protagonist wants to find a girlfriend. She feels very jealous but understands that she can't do anything. Her shoulders are slumped and she attracts Chen's attention by calling him by name. The main character closes his eyes and sighs hard, looking at the girl's condition. He opens his eyes and a faint smile is visible on his lips. Then he asks if she is angry with him. The girl looks with big eyes full of regret, tears, and embarrassment. She lowers her gaze full of tears and nods timidly in response. The protagonist says that a lost walk in the park is not a problem, but the girl disagrees with him, shaking her head. Zibo invites him to accompany him to the university or meet him later. Then his friend runs away very quickly, leaving them alone with each other. Chen is surprised by his friend's action while Xiao is still silent. The main character calls the girl, who is still crying. He asks her not to worry and come with him. Xiao quickly wipes away his tears with his hand and agrees to go with the main character. Chen takes over most of the luggage, letting the girl carry only one suitcase. He looks ahead carefully and leaves the girl in his dorm room and walks away. The protagonist takes off his glasses and says that the problems are over. He lowers his hand to his pants pocket, and the edge of a piece of white paper can be seen from him. A pretty girl gave the phone number of the dorm, saying that he can contact them at any time, while a disgruntled girl stands in the background. The main character holds the piece of paper in his hands and smiles happily, thinking that it is impossible to refuse such a thing. Meanwhile, in the background, a red poster with golden hieroglyphics can be seen welcoming students looking at the main entrance of the university. The protagonist realizes that he hadn't really come here for 10 years. Among the crowd of students walking around the campus, it is possible to see a girl with long bangs. She is in a hurry and suddenly bumps into the prota, causing the piece of paper that was previously given to her to fall out of her hands. With noticeable irritation, the main character looks at who bumped into him. The girl immediately starts to apologize, and he can't help but notice that she is immensely cute. The young man smiles in response to his apology and says that there is no need for it. The girl thanks him and quickly flees the scene of the collision, which causes the main character to be shocked. He picks up the fallen piece of paper and tries to remember the girl he just found. Chen continues to walk and thinks about how quickly this stranger fled. At that moment, two people are sitting at the table, an old man and a happy-looking girl. When the prota approaches this table, he is asked if he is a student, and the guy confirms this. The girl sitting at the table turns out to be his classmate, whose name is Hugh Linio. Then the girl introduces the old man and says that this is the teacher named Guo. The teacher tells him to fill in the information and go to the dormitory. The protagonist finishes filling out the paperwork, and a crowd of students can be seen gathering behind him. The girl warns him that he is going to live in the third building of room 602. The main character thanks and says goodbye to the girl and the teacher. He looks carefully at the various university students, noting that they are much more beautiful and attractive than the students at his school. Looking at the girls, he understands what attracts the attention of other guys and why they go to this university. He sighs strongly and carries the bag in his hands. Now the young man believes he needs to earn money before trying to find a girl. At this time, the information board is full of various inscriptions and papers, where it is difficult to find a specific ad, but he finally finds what suits him and hopes that it will help him make money in the future. The sunset sky slowly turns into night, and the lights come on in the dormitory where the main character lives. The young man walks wearily through the corridors of the dormitory, thinking about how many people there are. Chen smiles happily, thinking about how long it has been since he was in this room. He puts his hand on the door, opening it slightly and allowing the light to enter the corridor. The protagonist thinks his neighbors are still the same. He smiles and happily greets the neighbors, asking if he was the last to arrive. At that moment, the prota attracts the attention of three people at the same time, but one of them is especially happy to see him. The guy in the yellow shirt shakes his hand and introduces himself as Yang. His attention turns to the two remaining neighbors. The one in the blue blouse introduces himself as Xiang and the other introduces himself as Zhen. Then two more students appear. The one with glasses introduces himself as Lee and the other is Jin. At that moment, Jun is shocked that Jin has the latest model from Motorola, and Jin proudly confirms this. The main character is happy that they have remained the same and have not changed at all. Yang offers cigarettes to the main character, saying that he is the oldest. Chen listens carefully and invites everyone to number themselves according to their age. When the youngest receives cigarettes, he feels embarrassed. But Lai and Jin refuse cigarettes. The older guy is surprised by the refusal, and the second guy says that there are few types of cigarettes in the hostel. Jin says that these are very cheap and bad cigarettes of poor quality. He starts to make recommendations regarding cigarettes since there are lighter and tastier options. The older one is embarrassed and says that in his city he only smoked these cigarettes but had not heard of others. The protagonist thinks about how nice the students are for being able to even discuss such a simple topic. Meanwhile, the young man thinks about the 4 years of training ahead with the cigarette in his mouth. He looks disgruntled at the door of the dormitory and thinks that for 4 years everything here will surprise his roommates by hearing the noise and turning to the source of the sound in surprise. They ask what Chen is doing and he says that they need to keep the room clean. The eldest suggests making the hero the head of the room, and the others praise his decision about cleaning. His colleagues discuss how much responsibility he will have to have, responsible for sleeping, eating, and even resolving conflicts. The protagonist replied that he will have no problem accepting the position, and his roommates look at him with surprise and admiration. At night, words of praise are heard for the main character for his responsibility and courage. Morning comes and the sun shines brightly, illuminating the streets. In the morning, the main character wakes up to the sound of Jin's phone ringing too loudly. Lai tells Chen that he needs to go to class, then he needs a uniform. The protagonist's eyes widen in accomplishment, and he suddenly realizes something important. He jumps out of bed and says that this is the time to find the girls. Suddenly they arrive outside. Several students dressed in camouflage can be seen in the class. There are a large number of girls dressed in camouflage. The main character says that his classmates are not very beautiful and young, but Chen invites his classmates to go meet the girls. Several of his roommates are embarrassed by this proposal and do not respond. The protagonist confidently approaches a crowd of girls and tells one of them that a military uniform is for girls to communicate with each other, and among them the girl named Hugh, with whom he's already familiar. He greets this girl, and she is happy that he found her again. Hugh says that he is the only one of the 27 boys who dared to approach the girls. The main character introduces himself and asks if anyone from his gang province is here. One of the ponytail girls raises her hand and says that she is from this province. Chen's roommates are impressed by his flirting skills and say that people like him are always popular. One of the girls says that the first year is a lot of work and hopes that he can take care of his classmates from fourth. The confidence is visible in the protagonist's eyes, and he says that he needs to help the teacher manage the group. Suddenly, the young man sees the girl he met yesterday and asks Hugh about her. Hugh says that he forgot to introduce her. The girl blushes deeply and walks away. Hugh explains to the protagonist that this girl's name is Yuchu, and she is his roommate. The girl hides behind her back and then leaves completely. Hugh asks not to comment on this and explains that this girl has no parents. Her grades are low and she is studying on credit. The main character remembers that Yuchu was a diligent and intelligent student. Chen recalls a moment from the graduation ceremony of the university's undergraduate students. That day, Yuchu borrowed an incredibly beautiful dress from someone and shocked the entire university. He remembers the details of the outfit and admires the beauty of the girl. The young man remembers that their ties were broken in the future, but this time he will not let that happen. Already in the classroom, the teacher coughs and attracts the attention of the students, saying that the meeting has already begun. The teacher looks carefully at the students in the audience and invites them to meet each other. A girl with long red hair stands up and says that her name is Yanyan. The roommates of the protagonist begin to evaluate the girl, and Chen is perplexed by their behavior. Soon the young man's attention is attracted by the clumsy and shy voice of a girl. Yuchu stands near the board and talks briefly about himself and his home province. Chen's roommates are not impressed with the girl, but the protagonist knows what is hidden under that mask. The teacher talks about the need to choose a director as well as a representative of the group. The eldest among Chen's roommates invites him to be a representative, and the second roommate says that he will be able to help his friends. Hugh concentrates and thinks that she needs to try harder because there are competitors. She turns to the shy girl and tells her to ignore the guys because they are stupid. Yuchu is very embarrassed. Meanwhile, in front of a clear sky, the orders of the teachers are heard that must be followed unconditionally. A man in military uniform declares that a guy needs to cut his hair because he doesn't follow the rules. The outraged student defends his appearance and says that others also have long hair. Some students are wondering if they will also have to cut their hair, which is causing some girls to become hysterical. While the girls decide to defend their right to wear long hair, the main character sees that the Hugh girl runs away and decides that he needs to show who the real leader is. He calls the teacher and asks what he is doing. This immediately provokes a reaction from the military instructor. The main character stands with his hands in his pockets while his companions look at him in bewilderment shock. Chen introduces himself and says that he is a student in the second class of public administration. The teacher still holds the scissors in his hands, but Chen asks to keep them so that there are no problems. The teacher looks at him with a scary look and says that long hair is not allowed in military training, which scares absolutely everyone. A guy replied indignantly that no one will tell his hair. But Chen asks him to shut up and explains that the instructor was only invited to the training and nothing else. He asks the instructor what his boss would think if he saw him with scissors. The instructor is silent, and Chen thinks the guy is too afraid of the authorities to object. He questions if students can't have long hair and asks to see the rule. The young man says that if in fact there is a rule, he will be the first to shave his head. The instructor remains speechless and confused, not knowing what to say in response to the student. After a pause, the protagonist suggests wearing caps so that the hair bothers them and does not distract them during classes. The instructor accepts the option. The protagonist approaches the guy who is fighting with the instructor and tells him to apologize. The guy starts to get indignant and says he has no reason to apologize. The protagonist insists and the guy quickly obeys. Jackie approaches the instructor awkwardly and without looking him in the eye apologizes. The teacher closes his eyes and clears his throat awkwardly, thinking about something, and then begins to form a group. The girls are grateful for the protagonist's courage, and some of them are even interested in him. Hugh takes Yuchu by the hand and begins to push her away from the stadium. The main character asks the companions to form a line encouraging them. The instructor calls the main character by his first and last name, then informs him that the young man smoked and therefore broke the rules, so he must run 10 laps. The main character becomes darker than a cloud, and one of his companions laughs at this situation. Chen says that one of his companions also smokes, so he must run 5 laps. The instructor decides to punish both of them, so the two are forced to run 10 laps. After a while, they are already incredibly tired of running, but one of Chen's friends praises him for arguing with the instructor. The main character gets angry and says that it was Jackie's fault for not being able to remove his hair. Jack tried to make amends with the main character, offers his help at any time, just like a dinner. At this time, Hugh decides to give ice cream to the classmates and they thank her. The girls eat ice cream and discuss Hugh's desire to become the main one, and that's why she bribes people like this. One of the girls says that the protagonist seems the best option, but another girl says that it will be difficult to discuss matters with him. One of the girls, without thinking twice, says to vote for whoever she wants. The protagonist understands that it is difficult for girls to vote for him. He watches the instructor and the teacher stand at a distance and discuss something of their own. The protagonist decides that he will have his own path to achieve what he wants, using more influential and important people for this. At that moment, the teacher asks the instructor to notify him immediately of any problem, and offers dinner as an apology. The teacher sighs strongly, clearly not expecting such a situation with the instructor. The teacher is pulled out of his thoughts by the voice of the main character, who offers him a cigarette. The teacher takes the cigarette and asks Chen about the conflict. The protagonist confirms that the conflict has been resolved and the teacher praises him for the initiative, but he doesn't have time to finish talking because his phone starts ringing. The main character listens carefully to the conversation and understands that the teacher has personal problems and is overloaded with work. The voice on the phone shouts to the teacher that he must come and help, otherwise he may never come back. The professor looks at the phone in shock and the main character asks if his wife called, so he says he can take the professor's daughter. Although the man has doubts, the protagonist insists on his help, but the professor is afraid that he does not know how to get there. Chen assures that he knows the city and has relatives here. After thinking for a while, the teacher asks if the main character knows where the gold kindergarten is. Chen immediately names the necessary route and even describes the area. The man asks if he lived nearby and the main character says that he made guesses. Then he asks the teacher to contact the kindergarten teacher and also says that he will show his student ID to verify his identity. The teacher gives the main character a phone and says that the meeting will end no later than 7 o'clock. Chen takes the phone in his hands and says confidently that the teacher can count on him. Then the young man turns his gaze to the crowd of students. He looks at Hugh, who is talking to other girls, and he says to himself that sometimes it is worth resorting to other means to achieve the goal. The young man arrives near the kindergarten and it is possible to see many parents taking their children home. The protagonist introduces himself and says that he came to pick up the teacher's daughter. The teacher is suspicious of Chen and asks to call the teacher so that he can confirm everything. She calls the teacher Go and asks if it is true that his student should pick up his daughter. Go confirms and the teacher looks at the main character and says that she will ask for the student ID number. She then walks away and continues to listen to what teacher Go is telling her. The teacher warns that Chen needs to name the number. He replied that it is no problem and says all the numbers. The teacher confirms the authenticity of the number and ends the conversation with the child's father. She apologizes for her suspicion, but the protagonist says that there is nothing wrong with it. The teacher explains to the girl that the student came to pick her up and will take her to her father. Chen asks the girl to come with him and kneels down to be on the same level as her. Then he asks the child to say goodbye to the teacher, which the girl does. After a while, they go to KFC to have lunch and relax. He encourages the child to eat more and asks some questions. The girl happily eats a hamburger and willingly accepts to answer everything. Chen asks if she knows the teacher's number and the girl says she doesn't. The young man asks a question about the code for pics, but the girl doesn't know exactly what it is. There is an awkward pause between them and Chen smiles sheepishly at the child, then says that it is time for them to go home, because the girl has already eaten too much, but the little girl asks him to stay a little longer. Coming to night, the protagonist tells the teacher what his daughter is sleeping. The teacher's wife thanks the main character, and the teacher himself holds his sleepy daughter in his arms. Chen says there is no need to thank him. The wife gives the young man fruit as a thank you and invites him to dinner. The teacher offers to give the main character a ride to the bus stop. Chen smiles and thanks him for the fruits given to him, and for the kindness shown. Near the entrance of the university, it is possible to see many students doing their business and sitting on a bench. Chen sits on a bench and smokes. The donated fruits are on the bench in a bag. The protagonist sees Xiao coming towards him and says that it is time to sleep. The girl's gaze is attracted by the fruits that are in a bag on the bench. Xiao is happy with the fruits and asks where the main character bought them. The protagonist says that he bought them in a nearby store. The girl listens carefully and is a little surprised by the protagonist's statement. She straightens her hair and asks if he called her just to give her the fruits. The protagonist says that these fruits are expensive and asks her not to spend so much money. The girl wants to say something but is interrupted by someone who calls her name. She turns around and sees a guy with glasses who says he didn't expect to find her here. Everyone greets him. Xiao says that she heard that he works at the Institute of Geology of the Chinese Academy of Science. The guy with glasses shuts up and looks carefully at the main character. After a while, he breaks the awkward silence and asks who the boy is. The protagonist replies that he is Xiao's former classmate, then hands the guy with glasses a pack of cigarettes, but the guy refuses. The guy covers his nose because he clearly doesn't like the smell that comes from cigarettes. He points to the folder with documents and says he has to go so that the teacher can distribute topics to tomorrow. Xiao explains to Chen that they wanted to take this guy to the Academy of Sciences even before graduation, and one day he came to them looking for a lab. The girl looks at the main character expecting some kind of reaction, but the main character keeps smoking. After a while, he still looks at Xiao and asks what happened. The girl looks down and says that he offered her to be a lab assistant. Chen is surprised and looks away. The girl says she didn't accept the job. Chen doesn't react to it at all, which causes terrible irritation in the girl, who starts to get indignant that he's smoking again. The girl says that he didn't have this habit before and tells him to think about the future. The young man looks at the cigarette and says that he has plans to be with a certain girl. Xiao blushes and asks if the girl is beautiful. The protagonist replies that in all his years he has never met a girl like that. She asks what will happen if the girl rejects him. Chen replies that he does not plan to give up. Xiao asks if the protagonist is interested in the opinions of this girl's parents, but he says that he is only interested in the opinion of the girl herself. The girl blushes and her eyes widen in deep embarrassment. She abruptly runs away and tells the main character that she needs time to think. Chen scratches the back of his head, clearly shocked by his sudden change in mood. He stands still and wonders why Xiao needs to think about it since he is talking about Yuchu. The next day in the classroom, the teacher greets the students and says that enough time has passed for the students to get to know each other and be able to choose a group leader. He states that the initiative is encouraged so that each student can apply. The protagonist's friend asks him to nominate himself because he has already imagined his future. He was the first to nominate her candidacy, and one of the protagonist's friends looks at him with displeasure, thinking that he missed the chance. He gets up from his seat, and the teacher says that he needs to greet the candidate. The students actively applaud the candidate, who introduces herself and says that many students can meet her because she helped everyone in applying. Hugh says she is enthusiastic and will always help her classmates in their studies and other matters. In addition to ensuring a better future for the group, the teacher thanks her for her performance, and applause is heard by the entire audience with especially active applause. The girl returns to her seat and the teacher thanks her for such a speech and hopes that the next candidate will adopt the same spirit. Yuchu looks up and sees the main character passing by. Chen notices her gaze and turns his attention to her, smiling slightly. He comes forward and smiles confidently as the teacher behind him looks at him with interest. Strong applause spreads throughout the audience in honor of the main character. His roommates actively support him and wish him good luck. He begins his speech with a little joke, and the teacher notices how he calmed the audience. Then the protagonist promises that he will communicate with each teacher before the exam, thus helping the students and fight for their scholarships and allowances. He mentions that there is a big difference between their university and the school, so they need to discipline themselves. Yuchu listens to his speech very attentively, especially when he mentions that it will provide them with a good future if they choose him as their leader. Finally, the protagonist says that students can vote for him if they believe him. The teacher notes that the main character has many advantages, such as organization and leadership qualities. The man writes the voting results on the board, and the students cast their last vote on Shen. The teacher announces based on the results of the vote, with 27 points, the main character becomes leader. Chen thanks everyone for the votes while his teammates praise him. Meanwhile, Hugh reminds Yuchu that men are very unreliable, and she should not forget that. The disappointed girl walks across the university campus, thinking that everything has lost its meaning. Suddenly, the main character calls his opponent's name. Hugh is dissatisfied, waiting for him to show his new position. Chen states that he wants to invite her to dinner because they need to talk. The girl blushes with shame and incomprehension. Then she asks if he decided to become a leader to make her fall in love with him. The protagonist replies that he only wanted to discuss the details of the control with the girl. To prove his intentions, he offers to invite the girl to take her friend with him. Yuchu blushes in front of the protagonist as he says that he invited them to discuss something important. Hugh states that he should not expect blessings from her and her friend. The girl remembers that a few days ago he invited the boys to dinner but ignored the girls. Hugh gets up from his seat and go out to get food. Yuchu is embarrassed sitting in front of the main character, but he doesn't say anything. The young man looks intently at the girl in front of him as if remembering the details. He notices to himself her physical qualities and beauty. Yuchu finally decides to look at him, but doesn't stop blushing for a second. Chen smiles at her in response to eye contact. His smile grows as the girl burns with embarrassment. He returns to the table with a tray full of food and tells the main character the cost of the dishes. They start the meal, and the girl asks Chen what he wants from her and what is the essence of their date. The protagonist says that he has something important to do with her. Then he declares that he wants to give the position of boss to her. Hugh incredulously asks if the main character will really transfer the position to her. She questions if he is not going crazy. Chen states that everything is fine with him, but he wants to find out why he wants to be a leader. He is interested in his motives. The girl, after thinking for a while, replies that she wants to help the students, but the main character does not believe her. Hugh strangely looks away as if she had been caught red-handed and exposed. She says that she wants to become a civil servant in the future, so she needs the experience of a leader. It is valuable in such a job. The protagonist understands her motives and understands that she needs a career. While the girl cannot understand why he is asking this and what his true goals are, he states that he is only interested in money, and the girl says that she has no connections. He tells her that thanks to this position, his influence would increase, and the girl notes that this is an excellent tool to achieve the goal. When Chen asks if his opinions agree, the girl tries to say no. Meanwhile, Yuchu eats in silence and listens to their conversation. The protagonist states that he only needs this position for a year because he is not interested in being a leader. Yuchu is very embarrassed by this situation, so she thanks her for the food and wants to leave, but Chen says in an arrogant tone for the girl to go back to her place. This causes the girl to panic mode. Hugh starts to actively defend her. The main character pushes a peeled plate of shrimp towards the girl and says that he bought it especially for her. The girl writhes in surprise, but Chen asks her to finish and points to the plate with her hand. The panicked girl says she doesn't have to do it for her. Hugh watches this whole situation with confusion as the main character asks why Yuchu refuses shrimp. Hugh is really disgusted and can't understand what's going on. Chen looks at her with embarrassment. Some kind of resentment can be noticed in her eyes. He leans towards her and takes her hand, in which she is holding a cupcake. Then the young man asks if it is really that tasty and asks to try it. The girl is in shock. The protagonist tastes the dumpling and declares that it tastes not bad, but she still can't get over her surprise. With wide eyes, stuttering and sweating, she tries to say something but is interrupted by Hugh's scream, who calls for the protagonist. Hugh, not understanding the girl's reaction, comments that they still need to cooperate. At this moment, the young woman is seething with anger, while her friend burns with embarrassment. The protagonist, tilting his head slightly, reflects mentally. He has always considered Yanyan the most beautiful of the group, but now he understands who really excels in beauty. He finds this assessment strange and incomprehensible. Then, the girl comments that few people know how to distinguish true appearance and beauty. Therefore, the protagonist must keep everything a secret, as Yuchu is very shy, and her friend fears that she may come across malicious people. Chen agrees without hesitation but asks them to stop staring at him so closely when talking about bad people. He replies, mockingly, that all men think the same way. The protagonist believes he has taken a strategic step and decides to continue strengthening his relationships. After a brief pause, he proposes an agreement. In the second year, he will give up the position of leader. However, the girl questions what guarantees he can offer. Chen then presents her plan. During the first year, she will be able to gain everyone's trust, gain attention, and build a good image among teachers and students. In addition, she will be able to join the advisor squad, which will help her perform well in exams. Hugh suspects that he just wants to transfer his dirty work to her, but Chen convinces her that everything that belongs to him will eventually belong to her as well. Curious, the girl asks what more he can promise. With a confident smile, Chen replies that they can share the responsibilities. She will be in charge of the minor matters, while he will take care of the more important ones. Still skeptical, the girl questions what will happen if she refuses the deal he is so insistently offering. Chen responds matter-of-factly that, in this case, he will work even harder so that she has no chance of leadership, since universities rarely change leaders. Faced with this threat, the young woman is speechless. The protagonist then softens the tone, assuring her that he will help her in all matters. But the girl, increasingly angry, says that he is clearly lying and that he would never keep that promise, showing his contempt. Chen, trying to use his charisma, rests his chin on his hand and states that he has always been honest and sincere with everyone. Suddenly, the girl abruptly gets up from the table and declares that she accepts the deal. Then she tells her friend Yuchu that it's time to leave. Yuchu mutters a timid agreement, and the two leave. The protagonist, satisfied, mentally celebrates his success. His plan worked, and he managed to convince her. Days later, in a red and white restaurant, the excited voices of students echo through the hall, celebrating the end of military training. Students toast happily, while a wide variety of classic Chinese snacks fill the table. Gao encourages Xiao to eat more and suggests that they meet more often since they study at nearby universities. However, the girl refuses his concern. Meanwhile, the protagonist's best friend sits next to him with a dissatisfied expression. Chen notices and asks what is going on. His friend complains that at the University of Finance, there are 62 students in his group, but only 2 girls. Surprised, the protagonist widens his eyes and asks what these 2 girls are like. His friend, instead of responding, just continues to drink in silence, as if he doesn't want to talk about it. Understanding his frustration, Chen pats him on the shoulder and encourages him to continue drinking, without worrying. Meanwhile, Xiao says the university should be focused on studies, not relationships. But Zibo counters, saying that if there are girls available in her specialty, she'd better stay silent. Gao then calls Chen to sit closer to Xiao and asks his opinion of her. In the process of reaching the sticks, the protagonist accidentally touches Xiao's shoulder. Without hesitation, he apologizes for the action, leaving Gao and Xiao completely shocked. Zibo ignores Gao's dissatisfied screams and mentally says that he wanted to act like Chen without being considered cheeky, at which point Xiao says that they rarely meet, so they should definitely talk about their achievements. Gao is thinking of offending Chen, so he asks the young man to start talking about achievements and successes first. The protagonist slowly lights a cigarette, hoping for a dramatic break before giving his answer to his classmates. He blows the cigarette smoke and looks away, saying that he is the class leader. Gao plunges into total shock. He clearly didn't expect that from the main character and looks at him with great surprise. Chen's best friend also doesn't believe him and yells that the prota is definitely lying. Gao tries to accuse the main character of dishonest behavior and says that someone like him definitely couldn't become a group leader. The attention shifts from the main character to his best friend, and he is asked about his university. He mentions that the infrastructure of his school is not bad. There is even a restaurant there that they can go to together in the future. Meanwhile, Chen smokes silently and thinks that his classmates are a bunch of sentimental kids who pretend to be serious people. Gao thinks about how he spent the whole night writing about the advantages of his university and hopes that Xiao will transfer to his university, at which point Gao is finally asked about his university. But someone interrupts him and calls the main character, who informs him that after the start of classes the group is offered to carry out various activities and ask what kind of payment he will receive as a leader. The protagonist tells his colleagues that he needs to leave to talk about his business. Then he approached Hu and said that he receives 50 yuan per person, and despite doubting that it is too expensive, he claims that everything is fine. Chen looks at the girl and asks her to give those 50 to her friend Yuchu. The girl looks at him with an incomprehensible look, clearly with the intention of asking him a question, but she looks away from the hero and turns her gaze to her classmates, who are sitting in a cafe and waiting for him. Hu notices Xiao looking at Chen and instantly understands what exactly is going on. She returns her gaze back to the main character and takes the money from him. Then she says that she hopes the boss feels good. The protagonist is surprised by his behavior and mood swing. Xiao gets up from the table, obviously proud, and once again asks the main character if he is really a leader. Gao tries to belittle Chen's feat by saying that leaders are just servants and are far from being members of the student council, which he is about to join. The main character does not react to the attempt to offend him and says that he thinks exactly the same as Gao. Zibo asks about his new love interest and Chen asks, perplexed, when he got drunk. His friend continues to whisper to him that, in his opinion, the protagonist is trying to attract Yuchu's attention, but the main character asks him to remain silent. The classmates begin to say goodbye to each other, then they go together to a nearby station. The background of the station building, there are huge inscriptions made in golden hieroglyphics. The protagonist is about to leave the station when suddenly Xiao calls to him, clearly meaning something. She looks down as if collecting her thoughts before saying what she thinks. After a while, she turns her gaze to the main character, gathering her confidence and preparing to express her thought. She shouts loudly to the whole street that she appreciates Chen's persistence for her. This attracts the attention of absolutely all passersby. Such a loud statement bothers the young man. He looks as if he doesn't want to hear any more of that. After a while, the main character lights another cigarette and sits on a bench darker than a cloud. The young man feels like a scoundrel for letting Xiao think he still has feelings for her. After a few minutes, the young man arrives at a street near multi-story buildings. He approaches the office building and says that he is already near the Shentong Express. The young man looks at the warehouse workers and notes that there is no dress code here. All the workers dress as they want, he decides to take things into his own hands, so he approaches the worker and hands him a cigarette. Chen asks if the director of the establishment is there. The guy takes a cigarette and replies that Director Zhang is on the second floor. The protagonist thanks him and goes up to the second floor. He enters the director's office and sees the man sitting at his desk while writing something on a piece of paper. At first he doesn't notice the young man. When the principal turns his attention to the newcomer, he asks who he is. Chen pulls out a sheet indicating the vacancy and says that he saw a part-time offer. The principal asks where he is from, and the main character replies to the name of his university. The boss replies that someone has already come from his university. Then he warns that the young man can now go back to school. The protagonist hears this but does not want to give up. He asks the boss what he needs to do to replace this employee and get his job. The director of the company thought about the guy's proposal for a few seconds and questions if the guy really wants to go ahead. Chen thinks the man's reaction is a bad sign, so he says he doesn't see anything wrong with wanting to take a job because he just wants to make money. The director finds the main character a little strange, so he warns the young man that if he looks at his clothes you can see that he lives very well. Then why does the main character need money? The protagonist says that this is not a big office and there is no point in checking the whole process of each employee. The director replies that although the main character is very persistent, he cannot simply replace one employee with another. The director tells that the company is doing well now and is delivering a lot of packages. Chen replies that this is why they have no desire to change agents. The boss says that if he increases the number of daily references to 100, then the young man gets the job. The protagonist thinks this is a good offer and asks the director if he has a business card. The boss takes his letter and pulls it towards the main character. He takes it out of the man's hands, opens the doors and leaves. The principal returns to his documents and says that this boy is interesting. Meanwhile, other actions take place on the streets of the city. It is possible to hear voices inviting the residents to work at the club. Chen walks down the street and believes that in the future he will have to work with rich people and with many stores, so he thinks that at the university the easiest way to become known is to join some kind of club or union. At this moment, the young man is in a long line at the Student Relations Department office. One of the students notices the young man and asks if he came here to join the student association. He smiles hesitantly and says that for his group to have a good future, someone needs to join here. Hearing this, the girls look at each other and don't know what to say. They hold hands and say they are going to visit other places because they are friends, and it is not good to compete with each other. The protagonist says that tomorrow he will pay for their coffee, then they say goodbye in a friendly way. In the queue, a guy notices Chen and is clearly unhappy. The prota notices this guy's negative reaction and can't understand what caused it. The guy walks away and doesn't say anything, continuing to frown at him. Soon Chen receives an invitation from the commission to come in. Laugh enters the office and stands in front of 3 people. The protagonist realizes that this guy who is frowning at him is one of the judges in the office. They look at each other, and the guy looks at the young man with obvious hostility. The main character politely introduces himself and gives his name to the commission, but he is interrupted in the middle of a sentence. The boy who had dislike for him says that there is no need to introduce himself since they only recruit girls. Chen is dissatisfied with being silenced and starts to get angry with the selection committee. The commission girl whispers to the boy that he does not remember these conditions for the club's recruitment. He replies that he will explain everything to her later. Then he tells Chen that his commission often resolves issues related to business and sponsorship, so he believes that girls are more suitable for this and that Chen should leave and not take over the other team. The girl nearby notes that they had already chosen a guy until recently, so she is confused by saying that they only accept girls. The protagonist starts to get angry and asks the guy if this is really what everyone needs. The man is surprised by the young man's reaction, and a conflict starts between them. The audience is surprised and begins to closely follow the confusion between the two. The guy from the commission begins to get angry and says that every year the freshmen get harder and harder to keep in line. The girl next to him asks the young man to calm down, and the prota replies that he is completely calm, but wants to talk to the manager. The commission is shocked by this statement. The main character approaches the guy and starts saying that this is a strange gender discrimination. The guy replies that the connections are better maintained by the girls. Chen says that the most important thing is the correct completion of the task and not the gender of the worker. He also says that if only girls are needed, then what is this guy doing here? The people around him stand by Chen and tell the guy to leave. Suddenly a man appears behind them and says it's time for them to stop this charade. The protagonist turns around and looks at the newcomer guy. He doesn't recognize him and asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Zhu and says he's the vice president of the student union. He enters the office and says that if there is a problem he can call security. The main character calmly replies to the vice president that in this case it's time for him to leave. Zhu asks, surprised, where he would go. Chen replies that he can call the security guard himself. Zhuo doesn't know how to respond to such impudence. He asks which group is the main character and who is his advisor. Chen replies that he is the head of the second group and offers to give his number. The vice president is surprised by such impudence of the freshman in his speech. Then the girls enter the office and defend the protagonist. The commission girl approaches the main character and asks him not to fight. She tells him that he has already passed the interview and now you have to wait for the result. The character calms down and smiles at the girl. He says that in this case there is no need to worry. The guy from the commission starts to complain about the behavior of the main character, his arrogance and disregard for the club. Chen replies that there is no clause in the rules that prohibits the entry of freshmen into the club. The audience sides with the protagonist and says that if he can participate, then why do the judges stop him? The vice president says that all the responsibility is his and asks the protagonist if he could guarantee sponsorship. Chen questions if the man can always guarantee sponsorship and Joe responds positively. The protagonist says that in this case he can also easily deal with it, which causes an indignant reaction in the vice president. The audience sides with the protagonist and says that it's time to give freshmen the opportunity to join without depending on their gender. Shua says that they could use some help from the freshmen. He thinks he can give the main character a chance to prove himself. So the vice president wants to compare which one of them will be able to rake in more sponsorships in total. The girl next door says that Jew has a better chance because he has experience working in the student ministry for a year. The vice president asks if the main character wants to participate. Chen asks confidently what will happen if he wins and raises more money with sponsorship. Joe replies that in this case he can be vice president of the commission. The main character readily agrees and the guy is surprised by this because he did not expect such an answer. Chen points to the people who are nearby and says that there are many witnesses here, so Zhou can't refuse his promise. At this time they are given rules. At the beginning, one person is randomly selected to calculate the amount of the sponsorship. Whoever collects the most sponsors will win. They are asked if everything is clear regarding the rules. The protagonist's rival responds positively. The main character is not sure how reliable the system is with a random choice of one person, but he agrees to the conditions. The opponent has been assigned the place of a hairdresser and Chen has won a stationery store nearby. The opponent starts to walk away from them and says confidently that they will still see who will win here. The rest of the audience watches from afar as the guy communicates with the management of the hair salon. Yang tells the hero that the hairdresser, it opened recently, but the stationery store has been around for a long time. Chen tells him not to worry. The protagonist's rival returns and happily says that he has collected 200 sponsorship fees and a coupon of 300 yuan. The main character is not impressed and throws the cigarette. He walks away from the opponent and walks towards the crowd of students. A girl approaches him and offers help. She says she will start with him, since the young man is just a freshman. She enters the store and greets the owner, apologizing for disturb him, then begins to explain that the club collects sponsors for college. The owner, with a sudden and quick movement, hits the table with a book. He says in a loud sound that he already has a lot of debts, and that's why he can't sponsor anything. The girl says that he takes this book every time he is asked about sponsorship. The protagonist thinks it is difficult for people to make money. The salesman shows the book and says that if the students help deal with their debts, he can sponsor them. The girl is upset because she is sure that they will not be able to get anything from this man anymore. The club members look at Chen, confident that he will lose the competition. Suddenly, the main character turns to the shop owner and says that he can help him deal with his debts. The salesman is surprised by what he heard, as he did not expect such an offer from the student. The shopkeeper agrees to such conditions and Chen says that he will find out everything before the second half of the day. The salesman gives him instructions that he needs to go to the store across the street. There is a scary-looking middle-aged man with a big knife in one hand and a watermelon in the other. The girls are frightened by his appearance and even mistake him for a butcher and not a fruit seller. The rivals are pleased with this reaction of the girls. They think they will be afraid to go there and so they will lose the competition. The action takes place near a fruit shop in the market. Chen is in front of the shop of a menacing fruit seller. The seller raises his huge cleaver over the cutting of the fruit. It looks threatening, and with a strong blow, he cut the watermelon into 2 equal parts. With a loud sound, Chen's friends don't like this, but the main character doesn't react and the friends begin to convince him that debt is not so important. They believe that this seller is not very inclined to communicate. The protagonist tells them that if they are afraid he can go alone, they are surprised by this statement. The protagonist's rival asks the vice president if he should win. The man doesn't answer. Then the main character approaches the store owner. The man looks at him wiping the knife with a cloth, then asks the main character and the 2 friends who are behind him what they need. Chen smiles politely and tells the owner that he doesn't need the fruit and that he needs money. Hearing this, the seller looks at him with an ugly face. Then he gives another strong blow and cuts the watermelon into quarters. A loud thud is heard when the knife hits the wood. The owner looks at them and asks again what kind of money they are talking about. The watermelon juice on his knife looks like something else, which makes him look even more threatening. The friends are even more scared of this man. Despite this, very main character remains calm. He takes a small piece of watermelon from the seller's board in his hands and starts to eat it. Chen, calm and confident, tells the man that he came from the office supply store across the street. He says that the guy owes the store owner $3,500 and still hasn't paid it back. The store owner is surprised by the courage and impudence of the protagonist. He finds it strange that he is not afraid, so he asks when the store owner hired the main character. Chen replies that this should not worry him and again asks about money. The seller says that he does not owe $3,500. Chen replies that this is what he heard. Then the seller turns his attention to the protagonist's friends and asks what kind of people they are. The main character smiles and says that these are his classmates, and that if he does not repay debt, then they will have to take the necessary amount of fruit from him. The owner gets angry when he hears such a threat and yells at Chen, asking how he dares to do this. Then the guy goes to the back room and takes a paper that proves that he only owes $2,500 to the owner of the stationery store. The main character agrees with the named amount, and then the seller tells him to return the receipt. Chen says that he apparently heard it wrong and that the seller only owes $2,500. Then the prota says that he now has material proof of the debt and asks the store owner to pay him. The man yells at him, and the rest of the students supports the main character, telling the man to pay the debt. The guy starts yelling at them and asks what will happen if he doesn't pay his debt. A policeman approaches when he sees a crowd gathered around the store. He is trying to understand why so many people have gathered here. The policeman turns to the store owner and says he needs to interfere with the rest of the trade and disperse the crowd of people. The seller says that everything will be resolved. He gets even more annoyed with the main character, but Chen just stands there and smiles politely. The protagonist and his friends arrive at a stationery store and deliver the necessary amount to the owner of the stationery store. The owner says he never thought the money would come back to him and thanks Chen and his friends. He reaches out to get the wad of money, but the main character stops him. The owner asks what the problem is, and the main character replies that according to contract, this money belongs to him. As he recovered it from the debtor, the owner complains that the amount is too much and only offers 500 yuan. The students say they agreed differently, and the owner has to reluctantly agree with them. The main character finally received money for the sponsorship. He looks happily at the rivals in the competition and hands the money to the girl, saying that he received 500 from the owner. She is surprised by this, and the rivals stand behind them, looking at what is happening with dissatisfied faces. The main character looks confidently in his direction and asks the girl what it was. The girl looks at him with displeasure for a few seconds, but says nothing and takes the money from his hand. Voices are heard everywhere congratulating the character on his victory. After a while, the members of the club begin to leave, clearly upset by what just happened. The students shout behind them that according to plan they must vacate the chair's chair. Chen believes that they will not do this and tells his friends that they will drink. The friends are happy about it, and the rivals leave the building. Students are outraged that the members of the club ignored his promise. They believe they will not give up. The protagonist looks at the man and thinks that the president cannot afford to lose authority in the eyes of other students. It was already night outside. The main character is in the building with the rest of the students. They play cards and one of them shouts that he has gathered 4 kings and that the victory is his. Yang slaps the main character and he complains that Yang again assaulted him in a card game. Then another student shouts the news that Jackie and Zuo fought with each other. Yang and the main character are surprised. Yang says that Zuo is not that kind of person. The main character asks, where are these 2 people who fought in the dorm? After a while, a dense crowd is near them and discusses what is going on. They think the 2 guys are drinking. Yang and Chen approach the crowd. The young man doesn't like what's going on and the fact that the problems never end. Then the students hear a voice next to them. One of the teachers wants to go through the crowd, and one of the boys who fought was covered in scratches and bruises. Jackie looks at the teacher in front of him, and Suo looks at the wall with displeasure. They don't pay attention to the other students in the room. Suddenly, the protagonist enters the room. He turns to Professor Gao and says he was about to meet him. The teacher looks sternly at the students and asks the main character if he knows what happened here. The main character looks at the guys who fought and starts thinking about the reasons for the fight. He assumed that Zuo will invent something to involve him in this fight. Because it is a fight between 2 members of the club, the protagonist can be the culprit, which can lead to his expulsion. Chen does not know what to do and believes that the current situation can greatly damage his reputation. He thinks that this fight and its solution is a complex and difficult task. The professor tells the main character to stop being silent and tell what he knows about what happened. Jackie hesitantly begins to try to throw the blame on himself, but his sentences are interrupted. The protagonist does not allow him to finish and claims that he knows what happened here, although this is not true. Jackie is very surprised by this. The teacher says that the leader should not participate in such fights and tells him to write an explanatory note. Chen promises to do it in the evening of the same day. The teacher says that after the explanation he needs to apologize to Zhu and soon after he will be punished for what happened. The young man apologizes to Zhu and the man frowns at Chen. He continues to apologize at the same time as the doctor offers to examine the injured students. The doctor approaches Zhu and starts checking on him by touching his wounds and asking where it hurts. The teachers look at each other. The doctor states that everything is fine and that there is no need to prescribe medication or treatment. They begin to disperse the curious students gathered and say that it is time for them to go to their rooms to sleep. The protagonist tells Jackie to leave the fight site and return to his room. The boy is looking upset and agrees, turning to leave. At this time, only 2 people remain in the room. The main character is Zuo. There is a tension in the room. Zhu starts the conversation first. He tells the main character to stop pretending to be a kind person. Chen at first doesn't answer, but then he turns to the guy and says he only did it because he is a college student. Otherwise, he wouldn't help even if the guy's life depended on him. Zhu is surprised by what he heard. Then Chen turns around and starts to leave the room with his hands in his pockets. The students in the hallway look at him curiously. Jackie, upon seeing him, starts to apologize. The guy says he didn't want things to be like this between them. The protagonist, instead of answering the guy, hits him with a strong blow to the leg and Jackie falls to the ground. The friends ask if Jackie is okay, and he says that he deserved the blow. The hesitant students reassure the boy and say that the leader will forgive him. Jackie simply sits silently. He was clearly very upset about what happened. Meanwhile, the teachers communicate on the street. One of them says he didn't expect Chen to take the blame for something he didn't do. The other agrees with him, saying that the leader is very helpful. Gao talks about the student council. He thinks that the leader of his class is too wild. The teacher says that Zhu is smart and decided to take a risk this time to show that no one else deserves his position. Gao smokes a cigarette on the street and agrees with the teacher's words, but he wonders what will happen to his student. The other replies that he doesn't want to upset him, so he doesn't tell him. Meanwhile, the students gathered at the venue to discuss today's incident. The main character is sitting in a chair. He turned his back on the others and didn't say anything to them. Jackie apologizes to him and tells him that he lost his temper because of the drinking. Other students support him and say that he has already admitted his guilt. The protagonist hands over a cigarette, and Jackie, upon seeing him, rejoices. He takes the cigarette from the protagonist's hands and starts talking, but is interrupted by why Chen says that the incident was not useless. The students are surprised by this. He smokes and tells the others that after today the guy will no longer be able to be vice minister. The next day, an action takes place at a university club. The members gathered at the office and invited Chen. After they ask if he is ready to take the place of the club's vice president of public relations, the main character responds positively. He says that he will not disappoint them and will live up to their expectations. They say that after Zhu recently resigned, a vacancy became available and they decided to accept the main character. He is informed that he will take office after the holiday ends. Chen thanks him. Zhu is unhappy with what is happening. He says nothing and starts to leave the office. He then turns to the rest of the club members and says that the main character is not as simple as it seems at first glance. He then adds that they will regret their decision to accept Chen for the vacancy. The protagonist asks if the guy wants to say anything more about him. The man says he doesn't want to say anything else and warns that they will meet again. The protagonist begins to leave the club's office. After a while, the guy from the club thinks it's a form of gratitude. The girl says that she was invited to support the main character's candidacy and that she can't disappoint him. Some events unfold on the 1st of October. During a national holiday, there is a crowd of students on the street, and the main character says that the girl's father should not have met him. Xiao replies that in that case he will have to take the bus. They hear the driver say that it is time to hit the road. The car has 7 seats and belongs to Xiao's father. Gao says that Chen needs to act mature considering his age. Chen is tired of it. The driver says to get in the car and take their luggage and belongings to the back. Xiao sits in the passenger seat, and there's only an empty seat next to her. Gao is happy to be able to sit next to her. He opens the door and prepares to get into the car, but the protagonist tells him to let him go ahead because he wants to sit in the back seat of the car. Gao lets him pass and thinks everything is going well. So he looks at the hero and sees that he didn't sit in the back seat, but next to the girl. Gao asks if the young man didn't want to sit in the back, but Chen replies that he changed his mind. Then the student is led and told to get into the car. He is annoyed by the protagonist's mistake, but finally sits inside. The car is getting ready to hit the road, and Gao complains about the main character's behavior. He says he will never take his words seriously. At that moment, the driver instructs the students to fasten their seatbelt security. Gao in the back seat tries to start a conversation with the girl. He asks which club she joined. Xiao says he still doesn't know where to go because there are many options in front of her. Gao starts to brag and says he joined the advertising club and now he doesn't have to worry about anything. Zibo says that he wanted to join the club but was not accepted. The girl replies that she would like to join the student council. They then ask about Chen's club. The protagonist replies that he is the vice president of public relations of the student union. They answer that he is already the head of his group at the university, and where else he can try. Gao doesn't believe that the main character has become the vice president of the student council. The driver overhears the conversation and thinks he's sure that the main character has actually taken the post, judging by his experience with him. Suddenly, Gao starts saying that a freshman would not be allowed to take such a position. For that, he would have to be too excellent. He asks Chen's opinion, but he ignores the answer and says that he doesn't want to talk about such nonsense. After some time, the car stops on the street. They hear the sound of the brake and get out of the car. The driver says that this is where they say goodbye. Since he still has business to settle, the car then takes off and drives away from them. The girl says she still has a lot of luggage. Gao offers to help carry them. She realizes that something is wrong with the main character and asks if he can help her. The protagonist looks at her without any visible reaction. Gao, upon hearing this, says that he can help the girl carry the bags himself, but he is taken by Zibo. The guy is unhappy that he cannot stay with the girl and help her. This chance was for the main character. The protagonist thinks he could have arrived earlier so as not to carry other people's things, but Zibo wanted to save on the train ticket, and that's why he came with the girl. After a while, he is carrying Xiao's bags. She ran ahead and started eating a candy on a skewer, then offers it to the prota, but he refuses. Soon after, he decides to eat, and the girl approaches, delivering the candy directly to his mouth. This takes him by surprise, but he starts to eat. For a while, they don't say anything. She starts to tell something about what happened recently, but is interrupted. The main character looks deep into the crowd and sees that his father is there. The man looks perplexed at the embarrassing scene between Chen and the girl. The girl still hadn't noticed him, and the main character starts to think about how to get out of this situation. Other events unfold in the evening. The protagonist comes to the pool club to spend time there and relax. He stands near the table with a cue in his hands. The friend says he didn't expect them to find such cool places in the city. Zibo then notices two attractive girls coming up the stairs next to them. They talk about yesterday when the main character saw his father. Chen tells that his father was silent. He also says that his father knows. They continue playing billiards, and the main character, after the blow, says that it is his turn to hit. Zibo notices that the girls nearby are dressed very lightly and asks the main character if they are not freezing at this temperature. The protagonist assumes that they are already used to it, so he sits on a nearby chair and takes out a cigarette, starting to smoke, each time releasing clouds of smoke from his mouth while he is smoking. One of the girls approaches him and invites him to have a drink with her. The protagonist points to Zibo and says that she better seduce him because he has not had any experience. The girl listens to his advice and approaches Zibo, asking if he has not yet tasted the fruit of love. Zibo begins to stutter. Night falls on the street, and the moon is visible in the sky. They leave the nightclub, and the friend starts to complain that they only left at 10 p.m. The main character advises him to hold out until the new year. Zibo starts to say that he doesn't need a random girl he met at a nightclub. Chen takes a cigarette and starts smoking. The protagonist starts talking about what he did on campus, but suddenly becomes still. The friend starts asking what he was doing on campus, but the main character doesn't answer him. They both notice someone next to him and look in his direction. They shut up together. There are two girls there who look at them with surprise. The friend invites the main character to run away from here, but he replies that it's too late to run away, and they have already been seen. The main character thinks that since he and Xiao are not in a relationship, there is nothing wrong with him going to a nightclub. The young man smiles, saying that the party is over and her house is in the other direction. Xiao gets angry and says that he said he was going to his grandmother. The protagonist doesn't know how to answer and just looks at the girl. Xiao's friend mentions that they talked and that the girl wanted to date the main character. Xiao interrupts her friend and bends down, putting the drink she was holding on the ground. She tells her friend to get out of here, and they silently start walking. The friend starts saying that recently a new drink appeared in the store and Xiao bought it for him. The woman blames him for the places he visits and calls him a scoundrel. The main character doesn't understand what's wrong with this and thinks he didn't do anything wrong. The protagonist's friend tells him to talk to the girl. Chen feels bad about what happened, and Zibo says he might lose his girlfriend in this way. The fruit drink Xiao left spilled on the floor. A little later, the main character decides to call Xiao's father. He goes to the payphone and dials his number. The father picks up the phone, and Chen says he would like the phone to be passed to Xiao. The father looks at the door of the girl's room, and the girl does not answer the call. Then her father assumes that she is already asleep. He tells Chen that the girl is resting, and he should call tomorrow. Chen silently puts the phone back and returns home. The next day in the morning, he again starts calling Xiao's house, and her father picks up the phone. The young man asks him to give the phone to the girl, but the father says that she left home a while ago. A short time later, he calls the same place again. The father picks up the phone again and asks who is calling. Xiao is sitting next to him on the couch, but she doesn't answer her father's phone. The main character says he wants to talk to the girl, but is told that she hasn't come home yet. Although this is not true, Chen tells the girl's father to tell her that he is going back to university. The father whispers to the girl that the main character is returning today. But she does not react to this and continues to sit grumpily on the couch. Xiao ignores all the guy's attempts to establish contact. Her father is upset about this and looks at her, not knowing what to say in this situation. He asks the girl what was the reason for the fight between them and what happened the day before. She does not answer and continues to silently look at the floor. It is clear that she is upset with what is happening. Chen hangs up the payphone and starts to get out of there. He doesn't know what to do with their relationship. The father says that the mother will return soon. He believes that she will ask questions if she sees the daughter's condition. Instead of answering, the girl gets up from the couch and says she is going to the shower. The father decides to ask if she and Chen are in love with each other. She responds aggressively and forcefully that they are not in love. They have never been in love and never been. The protagonist is already at home. He packs his things to go back to university. The mother complains that until recently she raised her son, but now he is leaving without mercy. The protagonist replies that he can't do anything about it since he is a leader. The mother takes money and gives it to him, but the young man tells her that he doesn't need money. She asks how he doesn't need it, and Chen replies that he recently earned 2,500. Then he starts leaving the house, telling his parents to take care of their health and not fight with each other. The mother looks on, not knowing what to say. He closes the door behind him and his parents are left alone. The mother asks her husband if they have gotten old. The father asks why she thinks that. She says that it seems that Chen now has his own world, where he doesn't take money and doesn't need them at all. The father thinks this is good, because they will worry less about him. But the mother thinks this is wrong, and asks if her husband's classmates have daughters of the right age for Chen. The father remembers seeing his son and girl Xiao on the street as a couple. He tells his wife that his classmates probably have daughters of the right age. The man keeps remembering the scene between Chen and the girl. Meanwhile, there is a heavy rain outside, and the sky is covered with clouds and thunder. The main character walks without an umbrella along the flood. The young man thinks about how unfortunate it was to rain after he left his parents' house. The protagonist in the distance sees a girl who stands in the rain and gets wet. He recognizes her and the girl also sees him. Yuchu is surprised to see him here and Chen starts walking towards her. As he walks, he takes an umbrella from his backpack. Yuchu is embarrassed with him and blushes a little, because she remembers the last meeting, which was very strange. The girl remembers the embarrassing situation and feels very strange in his presence. Chen looks at her, making her feel even more uncomfortable. Yuchu starts to leave, but he stops her, telling the girl to wait. The protagonist approaches, saying that he will not eat her, and there is no reason to run away from him. They look at each other, and the atmosphere is very embarrassing. At this moment, the young man invites her to dinner together tonight. The girl doesn't answer, and he says they are classmates. In addition, he says that he is not very well today. Yuchu asks what he wants to eat. The protagonist says that there is a new dish in the cafeteria. When asked about the price, he replies that it costs 50 yuan. Then they decide to walk to the hostel, and the girl starts to insist that the guy walk faster. They enter the rain and she starts to run quickly. The protagonist continues to stand still, and she disappears from sight, saying that she is going to change. She goes with the young man's umbrella and he asks where hers is. Then Yuchu returns and replies that he gave it to Hugh, so that she would not look at herself. Chen is surprised and asks the girl if she herself does not need him so as not to get wet. She says that everything is fine, and the young man imagines that this girl is very innocent. So now they start walking together. Chen tells her to stay under the umbrella and not get wet. Finally, after a few minutes of walking, they arrived at the cafeteria. They ordered shrimp and lamb for 2 people, which costs in total it costs 53. The girl hands the bills to the cashier, and then they start looking for a place in the hall to sit. Chen asks if the girl went to the dormitory to get money, and she says yes. He looks at her perplexed but says nothing. They sit at the table and start silently eating their portions with chopsticks. The protagonist eats and looks at the girl, asking if she is hungry. He asks this because she is only holding the food with chopsticks and does nothing. Her face darkens and she gets upset hearing her question. Yuchu looks sad, and Chen says that this dish costs more than the price of accommodation and asks if she will not eat it. She says that she still has 100 yuan saved. In addition, she will earn a little money by sorting books in the library. She says that she can save money and eat in a cafe. Chen asks if she blames him for spending his money on food, and she replies no. The young man looks curiously at the girl but does not say anything directly to her. After a while, the protagonist gathers courage and says that in this case she needs to become his girlfriend. This surprises her and the girl ends up knocking over her rice dish. There is an awkward silence between them. Yuchu begins to feel embarrassed and blush. She doesn't know how to respond to such a rare proposal. Then she says, who only ate a few bites, and asks the main character not to force her to eat. The protagonist is surprised by her reaction but agrees and changes the topic of the conversation to something else. She looks at the rice spread on the table and says that she doesn't like to force people to do things. Yuchu remembers how Hugh convinced her that Chen took over as leader. Then her friend advises her to avoid him if she didn't like him. Yuchu looks at the main character but finds nothing to say. She is very embarrassed by what is happening in the dining room. So the girl decides it's time to go. The protagonist agrees since he has also eaten. He says that she needs to take an umbrella since the canteen is close to her dorm. In addition, he tells her to take the rest of the food from the cafeteria home. He walks away from her. Yuchu looks at the main character uncertainly but says nothing. Then the girl looks down and notices something lying on the table next to her. It turns out to be a white envelope that the main character didn't take. She says that he didn't take the envelope, but Chen had already left the room. Yuchu takes the envelope in his hands and looks at it. The next day, the protagonist tells the teacher that when he was visiting his parents, he took 2 geese to cook. The teacher thanks him and says that he wants to treat him. Chen replies that the teacher is too polite. Go tells his daughter that the protagonist is here. The little girl jumps into his arms and says that he has finally arrived. Chen replies that he came here to see her. She takes his hand and says that she knows what the Pix code he said is. Go doesn't understand what she's talking about. The protagonist thinks that next time he needs to give something to the girl. He says out loud that she should tell everyone what she discovered. Suddenly, the woman's voice is heard from the kitchen saying that the food is ready and that dinner can start. The main character turns to the teacher and says that he will go to the kitchen first. Go tells the main character that there is a girl in his room named Yuchu. Then he asks if the guy knows her. The protagonist confirms and the professor starts talking about her having problems in the family and that she asked for help from a scholarship to get into the university. It turns out that Hugh helped her, but now she is having problems. The professor asks the main character if he can handle this issue. Chen didn't answer the professor and just made a surprised expression on his face. The teacher asked him if he had any questions and the main character replied that he had no questions. Other events unfold on October 8th in the university building. Chen sits with his friends in class. Yang complains that it is difficult to come back after the holidays. Chen says that he is also tired. Suddenly, Hugh appeared and asked to talk to him. She takes him away from the rest of the students so that his conversation is not heard by anyone, then takes a white envelope from his pocket and shows it to the main character. She angrily asks what it means. The protagonist looks at the envelope and thinks about how the letter ended up in his possession. He says that these things should not be discussed here because students may not understand everything well. Hugh says that Yuchu asked her to return this letter. The protagonist asks if Yuchu opened the envelope. Hugh replied that Yuchu did not open it, but she did. The protagonist asks what she wants from him since he opened a letter that wasn't meant for her. Hugh says that he doesn't need to chase Yuchu and warns that there are other girls for him to fall in love with. The protagonist questions if he caused any harm to Yuchu. The girl says that he gave her 500 yuan and that it could offend her if she opened the envelope. The protagonist raises his hand and says that in any case he does not want to cause any harm to Yuchu. The girl does not believe his words, but then begins to think that everyone believes and trusts him. So this means that he behaves decently. Suddenly, the young man lights a cigarette and starts smoking. The girl moves away from the boy. He reveals that he is not in love with anyone. And then, she says that she knows that Hugh is single and he has some friends to introduce to her. Hugh is angry with him and is about to leave, but halfway around she turns and looks at him. The girl says that girls feel disconnected from boys. They often feel like they need to get closer to guys. Chen thinks this is a good offer, so the staff will become more friendly and he will be able to communicate with Yuchu. He asks what the girl is thinking. She says they could meet in a group and eat somewhere. Chen says this is too old-fashioned. He believes that everyone needs to be united somehow in another way. The girl asks if he made up anything. He replies that he will tell her when he returns to the dormitory. She turns around and says she is leaving. He interrupts her and tells her to wait a little longer. Chen puts out the cigarette and says that there is one more subject he wants to discuss with her. Hugh asks what it is. Then the young man says that she requested financial support for Yuchu, but did not say about the problems with the girl's approval. Hugh stutters and the protagonist says that they have already agreed that she would contact him when problems arise that she could not solve. He says that she has her own motivation and sense of dignity, but sometimes they need to be crossed. Hugh says he can solve it, and says that he will look for the commission again to try to get help. The protagonist says that he will go with her to deal with this situation, and she agrees. Then, Hugh meets with Yuchu and says that the teacher told everything to the prota and now he will deal with the problem. She feels embarrassed by this and doesn't know what to say. Suddenly, the girl notices a man at the door. Turns out to be the main character. He looks directly at her and makes her even more embarrassed. She puts her head on the table and hides her face. After a while, they arrive in the teacher's room. Hugh greets the teacher and Yuchu hides behind her friend. The main character looks at the teacher's face and recognizes him as Yu Epping. The man tells the girls that they came in vain as they still have to wait for the request to be approved. He says that the data provided is not enough. Hugh asks how long the whole process will take. Ping replies that he doesn't know, and that they will let you know when it's ready. The girl gets angry and says that she sent the documents before the vacation starts, and asks why nothing is ready yet. He says that they have certain financial rules, and that they should understand that. The three stand up and look at the teacher. Ping shuts up and doesn't look at them. The girl thinks that only Chen can solve the problem. Then she tells the teacher that he must understand the situation and that Yuchu is constantly saving on food. Hugh says that Yuchu always works late at the library, and that she will get a second job at the cafeteria to pay for food. She gets angry with him, and says that they should consider these things in relation to the students. The teacher is silent and doesn't pay attention to the words of the enraged girl. Hugh realizes that he has no reaction to her word, so she gets even angrier and can barely contain herself. The girl can't stand it and hits the table hard, asking what kind of teacher he is. The teacher opens a shelf on the desk and pulls out a small item. He gives the official seal and says that now the students themselves have all the responsibility for this situation. The protagonist pulls the girl and she tells him not to stop her from helping Yuchu. The protagonist tells the teacher that it's time for everyone to calm down a bit and pull themselves together. He drags the furious girl out of the room, ignoring her protests. They go out into the street in front of the building. The young man asks if she has calmed down yet. She complains that Yuchu has met all the conditions and never received help. Yuchu herself says that they don't have to go there anymore. She assures that everything is fine and that she can cope without financial support for the students. Chen sits on the steps of a building and sighs loudly. He addresses Hugh and asks for Yuchu's documents. The girl questions if he can handle it. The protagonist replied that he doesn't know if the idea will work, but thinks it's worth at least trying. Hugh believes that nothing will come of it since the teacher doesn't even want to try to understand the situation. Chen believes that the problem is something else. At that moment, he gets up from the steps and walks back to the building. The protagonist returns to Professor Ping's office. He says his name and apologizes for the girl's behavior, saying that she did not understand the situation. Ping agrees with him but remains silent. Chen notices something nearby in the office that catches his attention, so the young man goes to the closet and starts cleaning and putting things in order. The secretary watches this but says nothing. Chen puts the books in their place and displays them neatly on the shelf. He then takes a broom and starts sweeping the dust and debris on the office floor. The secretary wants to stop him, but the protagonist just smiles politely. Then he takes a mop and starts cleaning the floor. Ping works quietly all this time. Then he makes hot coffee for the secretary while filling out the paperwork at his desk. During the time that Chen is doing things, the morning passes and noon arrives. The secretary gets up from the table and says that he will eat during the break. The main character agrees and together with him leaves the office for the hallway. After a short time, the protagonist returns to the secretary's office. He greets him and Ping asks if he shouldn't go to class. The protagonist says he doesn't have class now in the afternoon. The secretary says he cleaned it well and can go back to the dorm room. But Chen replies that he just washed the floor and didn't have time to clean his closet. The secretary mentally says that it doesn't matter how much time the young man spends in his attempts to get help for Yuchu. Night is coming, and it's already 5:30. The main character and the secretary are still in the office. The secretary tells the character that he has already cleaned the floor in the closet, and now there is no need to come the next day. Chen replies that he is not done yet, and that he just removed the outside of the closet, but it has not yet cleaned the inside. The next morning, the main character continues cleaning the secretary's office and they do not communicate. On the third day, the situation repeats itself and once again they do not speak. On the fourth day, the protagonist still continues cleaning. Finally, the secretary turns to him and asks his name. Chen is cleaning out the closet right now and introduces himself, saying that he is the leader of his group. The guy invites him to smoke and he agrees. The guy lights his cigarette and they start smoking together. The guys stand next to each other and only release clouds of smoke. Ping asks if things are really that bad for Yuchu financially. The protagonist replies that her parents left early and she lived with her grandmother. He says that Yuchu saves as much as possible on food and that she only spends 50 yuan during the month. The man listens to Chen and puts the cigarette in the ashtray, saying that he now understands the girl's situation. The main character is still smoking and is no longer responsive. The events unfold in the secretary's office. The main character tells the secretary that he sees documents here that can encourage students to open their own business. The secretary replies that the university actually has very few resources for this, and all they can do for the students is vacate the classrooms. Ping says that now people open their own businesses to gain publicity. Then the man remembers something and starts looking on the shelf of his desk. He takes the documents and says that Chen doesn't need to come tomorrow. Then the together tells him to give it to Yuchu and fill out the documents. The protagonist is surprised and the secretary says that he talked to Gao and confirmed the girl's financial situation. According to him, the documents need to be presented next week. Chen asks if the documents from the city of Yuchu are necessary and Secretary replies that it is not very important. The guy starts reading the documents, and it is an application for applying for financial aid for low-income students. The protagonist is satisfied that he got it right and was able to help the girl. The protagonist arrives in the room where his friends gathered. They brag about which one of them helped him this week. The three of them helped him recently, and the main character agrees that their help is extremely important to him. The students support him, and the protagonist says that they need to organize events for the boys and girls in the group. The students love the idea and are excited about the opportunity to work on this project. Chen says that Hugh invited them to dinner and drink. His friends think this is a good idea, but Chen says that he did not approve of this option, and the perplexed students ask why. He argues that they are still too young for such events and entertainment. Hearing this, the guys ask if the main character has a better idea. Chen suggests going to the student activity center and buying 54 movie tickets. One of his friends dreams of sitting next to Yanian. Suddenly he reminds the protagonist that the cigarette has run out, so he says that without cigarettes he won't be able to think. Then the young man offers to go buy. The protagonist asks him not to buy that cheap. The man replies to him not to worry and says he will buy the right ones for him. After a while, the main character then approaches Yuchu, who is sitting at the table reading something in a book. She notices him but is very shy. The protagonist asks if she missed her while he was away in the previous days. Yuchu does not answer this, and he says he needs help to catch up on his studies because he was away. Then he asks if she heard him. She shyly and hesitantly says, yes. Suddenly a girl comes in and starts yelling at the main character, telling him not to bother Yuchu. The protagonist looks and says that Hugh arrived at the right time. He says he has a form to help low-income students and needs help to fill it out. The girl is happy to see the document and is surprised that the secretary still helped the main character get the approval. Yuchu hesitates to thank the main character for the service, but the young man says that when they have time they will need to sleep together. She is angry and embarrassed. Hugh filled out the application and asked the main character when the finances would arrive. He says that there is still no way to know. Then he says that to unite the team it is necessary to organize a joint screening of films. He says that he intends to buy 54 tickets in a youth activity. The young man also mentions that girls and boys will make raffles to determine who sits with whom. He says that this method can divide people into small groups and bring them together. In addition, the boy suggests that this can lead to the development of a love relationship. At that moment, the guy starts to leave, and the girl looks at him perplexed. She says nothing in response to the proposal. He then turns around and says that, as it is a collective event, no one can miss it. Yuchu is worried, but her friend tells her that she should go, because he helped her with financial help. She advises her to yell if the guy starts pestering her or behaving inappropriately. In front of the group, the main character announces that they will have a movie night. He explains that this activity is to unite the people in the room more, then points to the box saying that all the seats will be randomly drawn between men and women. The girls like the idea and say they haven't done it for a long time, so the event will surely be interesting. Students line up in front of the draw and begin to draw the numbers out of the box. One by one, some loudly announce their results while other students are making noise and discussing the places. Yuchu looks at her piece of paper and sees the number 706. She remembers that the protagonist said that they sat down together. At that moment, one of the teachers looks out the window and sees boys approaching the girls and starting to talk to them. Suddenly, a student approaches the protagonist and asks what place he took. Chen replies that it will be much more interesting if they find out after they enter the cinema. She doesn't like this answer and extends her hand asking him to let her look at his paper. The girl sees that the number 707 is written on Chen's paper. She looks at the paper for a second and gets upset when she sees his number, then tells him to forget about it and go to the movies. The protagonist holds his piece of paper in his hands, not knowing what to do. The guys arrive at the event dressed in various accessories and decorations. One of them pours out several bracelets and the other chooses a chain for his neck. The guy asks if the main character likes his hairstyle. The protagonist thinks that no matter what, his friends can't seem to look like adults. He asks the assembled students if they are ready, and they respond positively. After that, everyone gathers and begins to leave the university building. The doors of the building open and the students in the protagonist's group begin to leave first. The girls who dressed in dresses for this event leave. Chen realizes that the boys do not communicate with the girls, but believes that after seeing the movie several couples may appear. He looks at the door and wonders why Yuchu hasn't come yet. Suddenly the girl appears and asks for forgiveness for keeping him waiting. She makes excuses and stutters a little, saying that she spent a lot of time studying. She was out of breath and tired. The protagonist turns around and starts walking. Yuchu apologizes to him again and starts following him. He asks her if she wants to eat or drink. She answers both questions negatively. Chen says that the movie is long and she might get hungry. She hesitates to answer because she doesn't know if she wants something. The protagonist tells her to go ahead, that he will catch up with her a little later. Yuchu stands alone at the entrance of the cinema and waits for the main character to finally arrive. She wonders if he is mad at her. The girl is lonely and sadness is visible on her face. Suddenly, the main character comes up from behind with a bag of popcorn. He tells her to move on and not stand still. Suddenly, she clumsily stumbles on something and starts to fall to the ground. She gets scared and screams, but the protagonist holds her in his hands. She looks at him embarrassed. Chen tells her in her ear to walk more carefully, and she continues to feel shy and blush at his words. Finally, he takes her hand and leads her. Several dozen students are sitting in the movie theater and watching a movie on the big screen. The main character already knows the plot of this movie but wants to pretend he doesn't know. The guy notices Yuchu looking fascinated at the movie screen. He notes that she has a very thin wrist and doesn't eat meat. He thinks that the financial help will be very useful to her. She notices his look on her and looks in her direction. The girl feels shy at every contact with the guy. The protagonist pulls the girl's hand for them to hold hands. She starts to get embarrassed, but Chen pretends he doesn't care and asks her to be quiet. Because the most interesting part of the movie is about to start, she looks at him and doesn't know what to do in such a situation. In the end, she doesn't say anything and keeps holding his hand in hers. The movie ended. The protagonist asks if the girl liked today's movie. She says she liked it but sat for a long time. Chen says it didn't seem like much time for him, so the young man invites her to go to the cinema again. She is embarrassed and doesn't know how to respond to this proposal. The protagonist asks if her silence can be considered as consent. The girl gets nervous and says that this is not what she meant. He says nothing and looks carefully straight into her eyes. Yuchu also looks at the hero. The tension grows between them. The protagonist is about to say something to the girl, but he is suddenly interrupted by an athlete who passes by and ends up pushing the young man. Chen flies straight to the girl. Yuchu is startled when he gets too close and opens his eyes wide in surprise because of the push. He touches his lips to her face, which leads to an awkward situation that is similar to a kiss. The athlete runs more and apologizes for pushing the main character. The protagonist begins to apologize to Yuchu, but she is unable to hear him and begins to panic. The girl is very scared by what is happening, and without thinking pushes the main character. He falls straight into a pond. She yells at him, and the athlete looks at the situation with surprise. The protagonist comes out of the water and says that she almost finished him. The athlete approaches and asks if everything is okay. He thinks that the guy and the girl are arguing with each other. Chen says that the girl has an excellent reaction and reaches out to her so that she can help him out of the water. She agrees and pulls the soaking wet guy out of the pond. Yuchu starts apologizing awkwardly. He tells her to go without him because he needs to go back to the dorm and change his clothes to dry. The protagonist complains because the plan with the movie was a success, but because of an oversight all this happened. He leaves the girl and on the way sneezes because of the cold. She looks into the distance, and when he disappears from sight, the girl is left alone with her thoughts. She finds the situation funny and laughs a little at the embarrassment that happened between them. The protagonist finally returns to the staff in the dormitory. One of the students approaches the main character and starts complaining about how miserable his life is. Chen asks if his life is really even more miserable than his. At this moment, the guy notices the wet prota and asks what happened. Chen says that he accidentally fell into the lake, and that there is nothing special about it. A student talks about how the girl he was supposed to sit with exchanged the ticket, so because of this he had to sit with his aunt. The rest of the students think it's funny, but the boy still cries because of what happened. The protagonist calms him down a little. The student remains sad because the girl rejected him. He says it would be better if she just ignored him and didn't give him false hope. The guy cries and sings sad songs even after dawn. The students complain that he doesn't let anyone sleep properly with his singing. The main character tells the guy to get to the girl for good and suddenly call her to see some games. At that moment, another student arrives and says that he hears about a girl who recently had trouble dealing with an unhappy love. So this girl was from a nearby university and lived on the 3rd floor and ended up throwing herself from there. The guy says that she only had minor injuries. The protagonist immediately thinks of Xiao and asks for the address. The young man remembers the fight he had with her a few days ago. He thinks that she may be the girl who got hurt and wants to visit her. Chen starts to pack up and to leave the room. Friends say that it is too late to go anywhere. Chen runs barefoot out of the dorm while they shout after him that he forgot to put on his socks. At that moment, the young man arrives at the right building and says that he is looking for Xiao. The woman of the guard he asks what his name is. The protagonist lies and gives the name of the girl's father. The security calls and says that a man wants to meet her and that he came to see her. Xiao goes out on the street in his home clothes. She thinks because her father was looking for her at this time of day. Suddenly, she hears a voice and turns around, noticing the main character. Chen says that he only gave her father's name so that she could go down to talk to him. She calls him an idiot and turns to leave. The protagonist tries to reason with her and tells her to discuss everything calmly. She replies that he should discuss everything with the girls at the bar. He says that she can leave, but tomorrow he will come with a big poster and will put it in the back of his dorm saying that she can study because he will be taking care of the children. Xiao is angry with him for such a proposal, but she sighs and reluctantly agrees to talk to him. The protagonist says that he called her many times but she didn't answer the phone, so he couldn't explain to her what happened on the night of the fight. He says that Zibo had a fight with his mother that day and asked them to go out together. She asks if his friend invited him to that bar. The girl has a hard time believing it. The main character says that it was a mistake to agree to this offer and that now he understands it and should have turned him down. She asks what he was doing in the nightclub. Chen replies that he was just playing pool with Zibo. He says that if she doesn't believe she can call her friend and ask. Xiao listens to the explanation and silently looks at him for a while. Then she walks away from him. Chen doesn't understand what kind of reaction this is. She stays there for a few seconds. Both the boy and the girl are silent. Soon an awkward silence fell between them. Suddenly, the girl tells him to go with her to the library at 7:30 tomorrow without delay. Without giving him time to respond, she turns and runs back to her student dorm. He looks on without understanding what just happened. The next day at 7:30 a.m., the main character came and stood at the entrance wondering why she made an appointment so early in the morning. At that moment, he sees some guys holding food packets in their hands. He assumes that they came to give breakfast to their girls. Suddenly, the doors open and 3 girls come out of the library. One of them is Xiao. The girl looks at the main character. Then the guys who were waiting nearby with food all run to Xiao. They start handing him food packages. One of them bought an egg, the other bought bread, and the third bought a full breakfast. Xiao thanks him but politely refuses the food offered. One of the boys leaves a package of food nearby. He is upset with the girl's refusal and says that even if she rejects him, something can work out between them one day. But he is interrupted because the protagonist takes the food left by the boy and starts eating. The guy does not understand how this is possible. The main character still continues to eat, not paying attention to the protests. Then he asks if the guy would like to give him his drink. At that moment, Xiao starts to drag him away. The protagonist complains because he wanted to eat more. The 3 guys look at her upset. After a short time, Xiao and the main character gather at the entrance of the library. She asks if Chen is interested in knowing who these guys were. He asks who they were. The girl believes that the question was asked insincerely and doesn't want to answer it. She gives him the bag and says that she will look for the book and let him find a place for now. He sits at a free desk in the library and starts waiting for the girl. He is bored. Xiao comes back with books and says that he took books to him about his specialty. Chen replies that he is more interested in law books. She asks why he needs these books if he does not study this discipline. The young man replies that students often start their own businesses, and knowledge of the laws can help a lot in this. Then he says that he really doesn't want to read it, and prefers to ask a relevant college pretty girl to read these books to him. Xiao gets angry at these words, so they stay silent for a while studying. The protagonist notices a guy in the distance watching them. Chen asks her if she reads books about her specialty, and she responds positively. The protagonist notes that many times men turn to her for help, and she agrees. He asks if she used it this morning to fend off these guys. The girl agrees that she didn't do it anyway. Then suddenly the protagonist starts to get up from the table and says that she wants to make sure that no one bothers her again. She doesn't understand what he is talking about. Chen puts his hand on the table and approaches the girl, who doesn't know how to react to this. He leans over and kisses her on the lips. She is shocked by this and does nothing in response. Xiao blushes very red with embarrassment but does not stop with the kiss. The scene passes and later the protagonist spits red liquid into the sink. He looks at himself in the mirror and realizes that the girl almost bit his lip. Chen remembers the kiss and thinks that for the girl it was his first kiss, and that's why she got angry. His friend next door asks if he has a bruised lip. He replies that he just bit her, and there is nothing to worry about. The guy says to be careful, and also adds that soon there will be a check with the teacher, so he can't forget. Chen hears the ringing of the phone and leaves the balcony. Someone says that a girl is probably looking for him right now. He enters the room and picks up the phone. Xiao asks him about the state of his mouth. She worries if she bit his lip. Chen draws attention to the fact that his friend is sitting next to him and possibly overhears his dialogue with the girl. The friend gets jealous of this dialogue and wonders if the leader has a beautiful girl. A while later, there is an action in the university auditorium. Someone is calling Yuchu. The cheerful girl looks at her and says that her request for financial aid for low-income students has been approved. Yuchu thanks her and rejoices with the news she received. She feels much more comfortable with her friend than with her. The girl says that Chen is trustworthy, and Yuchu agrees to this. The guys enter the room, including the main character. The girls notice. He enters and also pays attention to Yuchu. The girl recalls the previous situation and feels embarrassed, quickly looking away from Chen. The protagonist asks if his application for financial aid for low-income students has been approved. As he speaks, he casually places his elbow on her shoulder. Who, noticing this, questions why he does it. Chen simply replies that he's just saying hello. Then, with a confident tone, he states that it was thanks to his merit that the request was approved. While they have already resolved this issue, he adds, they still need to thank the secretary. Leaning toward Yuchu, he suggests they give essential gifts like pastes as a token of appreciation. However, his friend pushes him aside, asking how exactly he plans to thank the secretary. Chen replies that Yuchu should also contribute to the gift. Curious, Yuchu asks what needs to be bought. One of their friends playfully mentions that Yuchu constantly eats dried peppers and suggests giving some to the secretary. Another girl chimes in, saying that Yuchu found wild vegetables near the dormitory and waters them daily. Yuchu immediately feels embarrassed upon hearing this. An awkward silence settles over the group. Chen then proposes peeling the vegetables and peppers before handing them to the secretary as a small gesture of gratitude. While the protagonist himself doesn't know what the pepper tastes like, he soon realizes that half the group has never tried it either. Yuchu, surprised, asks if most people have really never tasted pepper before. 2 days later, Chen and his friends are walking down the street, chatting. One of the students complains about his game not being saved. Suddenly, Hugh appears, looking frustrated, and starts complaining to the protagonist. She tells him that Yuchu is crying. Concerned, Chen asks what happened. Hugh explains that after he suggested giving peppers as a gift, Yuchu went to the vegetable garden to pick some. While working, she was bitten by insects, leaving unpleasant red marks on her skin. Wanting to avoid disturbing her roommates with the strong smell, she left the peppers on the balcony overnight. The next morning, she took them to the classroom. However, none of the students wanted to try them, complaining about the vegetable's unpleasant aroma. One of Chen's friends, who had already eaten breakfast, refused to risk tasting it. Realizing this, the protagonist assumes that Yuchu broke down in tears because of their rejection. Chen arrives at the classroom and spots Yuchu sitting alone in the corner. She remains silent, staring down at her lap. No students sit near her, and she discreetly hides her arm, still marked by the insect bites. The teacher enters the room and instructs everyone to take their seats as class is about to begin. However, Chen steps forward and announces that he must delay the lesson for a moment. Standing before the class, he prepares to eat. The room falls silent, and all eyes are fixed on him. Yuchu watches him with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Chen approaches the plate of peppers, lifts the lid, and stares at them for a few seconds without saying a word. The students anxiously observe his every move. Then, without hesitation, he picks up a pepper with his fingers and puts it into his mouth, chewing slowly. The room remains still as Yuchu watches him closely. Chen continues chewing, the crisp sound echoing in the quiet classroom. Then, with a satisfied expression, he declares that the peppers are delicious. Holding up the bowl, he invites the others to try them. A student named Yang is the first to accept the offer, and soon, more students begin eating as well. As they taste the peppers, they express their surprise at how good they are, agreeing that one should never judge a book by its cover. More students arrive, intrigued by the commotion, and begin eating alongside the others. Yuchu, watching everything unfold, blushes. Slowly, as she sees her classmates enjoying the food, her sadness fades. Excited voices fill the room as some students remark that the dish is so good it could even be sold. Others agree, calling it a rare opportunity to try something unique. Overwhelmed with emotion, Yuchu starts to cry, this time out of happiness. She wipes away her tears as her classmates continue eating, turning what was once a moment of embarrassment into one of warmth and acceptance.